All right. Good morning. That is pathetic. Good morning. There we go. I'm Gifford Miller, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the chair of the board of the Center for an Urban Future. And it's my job to welcome you all here and welcome you to this, which is the third annual New York City Economic Mobility Summit. Thank you so much for coming. We have an amazing crowd and a lot of people still coming in, and then also a lot of people online. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and particularly, I want to thank Citi and the Citi Foundation for hosting us. This is a really exciting relationship, and we're really, really appreciative to Citi for making this possible here, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to have all of you folks and 800 people signed up on our live stream. So this is an amazing opportunity to talk about the kinds of issues that we care about so deeply at CUF. We hold a lot of good and even some great policy forums. And these discussions usually zoom in on a specific issue or opportunity, such as expanding access to tech centers or boosting college and career success for CUNY students, supporting low-income entrepreneurs, harnessing the city's branch libraries, or scaling up effective workforce training programs. But our individual reports and forums are part of our bigger mission. All of them come together around the notion of the need to make progress around economic mobility in New York. And if you think about it, that's what makes New York, New York. If we lose that feeling that this is the place that you come to build a better life, we stop being not just America, but New York. And I always am very frustrated when people say that New York is sort of different than the rest of the United States. No, we are the absolute center and the core of what makes America, America, because we really do it. Our community colleges, our schools, our jobs, we actually take people and bring them into the middle class, and we must continue to do that to remain who we are as a city and as a country. And it's why we started this annual summit 2 years ago, to bring a new level of discussion around the policies that can be implemented locally to ensure a lot more New Yorkers are able to exit poverty and climb into the middle class. As a former city official, and now we're really going way back, I can attest that a lot of people in government are looking for smart policy ideas to help New Yorkers get ahead. And that is what CUF is all about. Our reports and forums consistently raise the visibility of underappreciated issues, and then, more importantly, we provide policymakers with ideas that are fresh, innovative, and achievable. And I can't express this more importantly. It's one thing to identify a problem. It's another thing to identify all the various things that have made the problem hard to solve. But it's a completely different one to identify a problem and then identify practical solutions that are actually capable of being implemented. And that is what we do, and that is why we make such a difference here in New York City. And it's why a recent article about CUF and Crane's New York business was titled "The Think Tank Quietly Influencing New York's Top Officials." Today we're just doing it louder. This year, our summit is zooming in on one of the most pressing issues for our city, which is housing affordability. We'll be delving into a part of the housing discussion that hasn't yet gotten a ton of attention, which is the connection between housing and economic mobility. And as somebody who is also a affordable housing developer, it's extraordinary that this gets missed, because the reality is that without a home, almost everything is impossible. You can't find a job, you can't get your kids a good education, you can't live and prosper without a home. And so it's such an important thing that there's an exciting consensus emerging that New York needs to develop a significant amount of new affordable housing to address the affordability crisis, but also we are going to be exploring how the city can leverage housing policy to expand ownership, asset building, wealth creation, and economic mobility. We have some amazing speakers to help us today discuss these issues, including City Council Speaker Julie Menin, Deputy Mayor Leila Bozorg, how must I'm saying that terribly? Okay. I apologize. HPD Commissioner Dina Levy, CUNY Chancellor Félix Matos Rodríguez, and former First Deputy Mayor Torres-Springer. In addition to the panels and fireside chats today, staff and board members from CUF will be delivering 5 3-minute idea pitches, briefly outlining policy ideas from a new report we are publishing this morning, 5 ideas to advance economic mobility in New York. One quick programming change is that we will be starting the day with the deputy mayor and ending the summit with the fireside chat with the speaker. So before we move forward, I'd like to once again thank the Citi Foundation for their support for today's event and for their continued efforts to support affordable housing and community development in New York. We're also grateful to the Citi Foundation for supporting an exciting project we'll be kicking off in the fall, which is a series of policy briefs shining a light on successful economic mobility programs implemented in other cities that have the potential for replication here. Thank you, Citi. And then I'm going to say this. You're going to be amazed. I'd like to ask our CUF staff to stand up. Please stand up if you work for the Center for Urban Future. Right? All of that by these, there's so few staff members that do so much incredible work. It's absolutely amazing, the output. So on the board, we're so fortunate to be able to be represented by such an amazing group of people. Now let's get the summit started, and our first speaker is going to be Katie Knight to deliver CUF's first idea pitch of the day.
Thanks, Gifford. Hi. I'm Katie Knight. I'm President and Executive Director of Siegel Family Endowment, which is a foundation focused on the impact of technology on society. But I'm here today as a proud board member of the Center for an Urban Future, which means also for once in months, I'm not here to talk about AI. I'm actually delighted to instead be delivering CUF's first idea pitch, as Gifford mentioned. When people think about college, they often picture an 18-year-old heading straight from high school to campus. But at CUNY, that is only part of the story. As of fall 2025, more than 46,000 CUNY undergraduate students are aged 25 and older. That's more than the total undergraduate enrollment of NYU and Columbia combined. And this population is growing. Since the launch of CUNY Reconnect in 2022, tens of thousands of New Yorkers with some college credits but no degree are getting help to return to CUNY. In fact, the number of students aged 25 and older enrolled at CUNY's community colleges has surged 22% during this time. CUNY is already the nation's most powerful engine of social and economic mobility. There are plenty of CUF reports underlining that point if you need some reading material. Now's the time for city and state leaders to help CUNY become the nation's leading public university system for adult learners too. Adult learners bring enormous strengths to college: maturity, focus, work experience, and a clear sense of purpose. But they also face challenges that most traditional age students do not. Above all, the daily balancing act of school, work, caregiving, and supporting themselves and their families. The good news is that CUNY is not starting from scratch. Its strategic plan already points in this direction, and promising work is taking shape across the university. Now, policymakers should help CUNY take this work to scale. That should start with making flexible pathways the norm, not the exception. Online, hybrid, evening, weekend, and accelerated options that preserve quality while creating more accessible paths to completion. The city should also help CUNY pilot a new support model for the many part-time adult learners, call it CUNY Flex, that extends hands-on advising, free Omni cards, technology support, and childcare assistance to working adults who cannot enroll full-time. And city and state leaders should remove the financial tripwires that keep adults from returning and persisting, including a CUNY Fresh Start initiative to resolve unpaid balances. At the same time, CUNY should scale credit for prior learning so that college-level learning gained through work, training, military service, and lived experience counts. For New York City to expand economic mobility, few opportunities are more urgent or more achievable, thank you, Gifford, than helping CUNY become the nation's leading public university system for adult learners. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, and good morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Bowles. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future, and I'm so excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Deputy Mayor for Housing and Planning, Leila Bozorg. Deputy Mayor Bozorg is leading what is arguably the most important task in city government today, addressing the city's affordable housing crisis. She is already off to an impressive start. Among other things, she led the rollout of the Mamdani administration's ambitious block-by-block affordable housing roadmap, which, among other things, includes new support to turn neglected rental properties into affordable co-ops and an expansion of community land trusts. These are just a few of several big things that she and her team have already accomplished on housing policy in barely 7 months. A big thank you to her and her team for moving up the timing of her remarks today at our request, and an even bigger thanks for the important work she is doing in City Hall. Please join me in welcoming Deputy Mayor Bozorg.
Thank you, Jonathan. And yes, happy to change my slot with Speaker Menin, who is managing what will likely be a very long hearing on our horse carriage situation in the city. And yes, my name is Leila Bozorg. It's okay that you butchered my last name, but I will note I really like the size of this podium. My last name in Farsi actually means big. And usually when I'm standing at podiums, I'm reminded of the irony of that. So this is nice. But thank you. It is actually a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the Center for the Urban Future, not just for having me, but for having this really important conversation on economic mobility at this very specific time for our city and in our city. It really does feel like the right moment to be talking about these issues. It's also nice to be around so many familiar faces, people who I know have spent their lives and their entire careers thinking about how to make our city more affordable, more equitable, and more prosperous. Over the next few hours, I was looking at the agenda, it looks amazing. You're gonna be hearing this subject and have it taken apart from a lot of different angles. Asset building and wealth creation, opening doors to opportunity-rich neighborhoods, what housing instability means to a CUNY student trying to finish a degree without a stable place to sleep. My own colleague, Dina Levy, Commissioner of HPD, is gonna go deeper on home ownership and asset building strategies that we're working on together. So I thought I'd lay out some of what we're working on in the broader housing and planning portfolio and why we're working on it, and then let the rest of the day test whether we're on the right path. As Deputy Mayor for Housing and Planning, I have the privilege of leading the housing and land use strategies in our city. That includes the New York City Public Housing Authority, the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, the Housing Development Corporation, the Department of City Planning, the Department of Buildings, the Landmark Preservation Commission, the Public Design Commission, the Office of Housing Recovery Operations, the Mayor's Office to Protect Tenants, and more. I say leading, but the truth is the people who work in that alphabet soup of agencies do a lot of the hard work. The planning, the financing, the reviewing, approving, inspecting, and caring for the homes New Yorkers really rely on. My job, of course, is to set the direction, clear the obstacles in their way, make sure they have the resources they need to deliver, and then hold them to the highest standards for execution. A good deal of what I'm going to describe today is the work of hundreds and hundreds of dedicated public servants. But as Jonathan noted, it's also the work of many advocates and partners in this room, because none of this work gets done by government alone, and many of our best ideas that we've been able to execute on and move recently has been done through immense collaboration. So I'm very grateful to get to do this work alongside colleagues in government, but alongside each of you as well. Now, housing, as has been discussed a lot recently, is, of course, at the center of nearly every affordability challenge facing New York City today. It determines whether families can stay in the neighborhoods they love, whether employers can recruit and retain workers, whether New York remains the city of opportunity it has always aspired to be. Not that anyone in this room needs the reminder, but let me note the challenging context that we're operating within today. We're facing an unprecedented and severe housing shortage. More than half of renters in the city are considered rent burden. Nearly 90,000 of our neighbors sleep in municipal shelters every night, including over 28,000 children. Too many people live with substandard conditions or in overcrowded apartments because they cannot find an option that fits their needs. And NYCHA's capital backlog, an incredibly important stock of deeply affordable housing, has grown to a mind-rattling $78 billion. That's a number representing leaky pipes, frequent heat and hot water outages, systems well past their useful life, and other unsafe living conditions. The federal funding for all of public housing nationwide doesn't even begin to cover a fraction of our need in New York City. These are housing statistics, but they are also economic statistics. And they are also socioeconomic statistics if you dig deeper, because there are racial disparities beneath each of those facts I just shared. We tend to treat housing and economic opportunity as separate problems. While they are not the same problem, they are deeply interconnected. A home shapes which schools a child can walk to, which jobs are close enough to be worth taking, whether a family can absorb an unexpected bill without losing everything, and whether the money left at the end of the month goes towards a future and saving for that future, or towards survival for today. A home in this city, more than most, cannot be thought of as a prize you collect once you've made it. It is the precondition for making it at all. That conviction sits beneath everything my agencies are working on. Our housing plan is an important piece of a broader affordability vision for the city, a vision that recognizes that meaningfully taking on our housing crisis is among the most powerful economic mobility strategies the city can put forward. The mayor said it more memorably when we rolled out our housing plan. When New Yorkers can afford a home, they can afford to dream. And you see the mechanics of the housing crisis in almost any family's budget. For those who earn the least, the first of the month is truly scary, and for good reason. They're living one rent increase away from losing the block they helped build. When rent takes too large a share of paycheck, everything downstream contracts. There's less for childcare, less for the commute to a better job, less to put towards a down payment or a cushion against catastrophe. The same logic scales up to the entire economy. When workers can't afford to live near where jobs are growing, employers cannot hire and keep the people they need. This has massive implications for our economy. And when young people cannot find a foothold, they defer building a life here or they build it somewhere else entirely. Now, for the last century, building a life in America has meant striving to own a home as a means to build and pass down wealth. And for much of the century, government decided who could take part. This history is well known, especially by people in this room, but it's worth a quick Cliff Notes reminder. Starting in the 1930s, federal agencies drew maps grading Black and mixed-race neighborhoods as too risky to lend in, the practice we now call redlining. After the war, the FHA and the VA underwrote suburban homeownership boom that built the modern middle class while denying those same loans to Black families and endorsing the covenants that kept neighborhoods segregated. Because home equity is the largest asset most families ever hold, and because wealth compounds and is inherited, exclusion in one generation has become exclusion in the next. That is the vicious cycle of inequality whose legacy we continue to be faced with today. It was built by policy and it was intentional, and that legacy remains measurable. The median white family in the country holds roughly 6 times the wealth of the median Black family, and the gap in home ownership is now the widest it's been in over 50 years. And asset wealth is only part of the story. Where a family can afford to live also shapes what schools their children can attend, which social networks they can join, and which jobs are within reach. Everyone in this room knows what Raj Chetty and Opportunity Insights work has shown, how the neighborhood a child grows up in has significant causal effects on the prospects for upward mobility, and that those effects accumulate with each year of a childhood spent there. Exclusionary zoning and generations of segregation confine too many families to the places with the least investment. So housing in this country does not simply reflect opportunity, it distributes it. In a city that is nearly 70% renters and among the most segregated in the nation, that inheritance runs deep, and it continues to fall hardest on Black and brown New Yorkers. If housing distributes opportunity, then our work is to democratize it. Now, New York City is one that has long embraced an expansive vision of home ownership, one that values generational stability and the multiple forms that stability might take. Consider a rent-stabilized family passing the lease on to the next generation, ensuring financial stability in the face of an ongoing housing emergency and broader gentrification. Or the nation's first limited equity co-ops, including Penn South, where civil rights leaders gathered in community rooms to plan the March on Washington and fight for equity and opportunity for all. Or even more recently, Consider a NYCHA tenant association collectively visioning what should happen to their homes as PACT or the Preservation Trust delivers millions in new investments stemming from long-term, automatically renewing federal funding contracts that stabilize their buildings for generations to come. These are all ways that New Yorkers specifically have been able to express ownership over their homes, their neighborhoods, and their city. Having a safe and secure home is the foundation of so much opportunity here. And these housing models have not only made New York City the city it is today, but they can offer a type of stability otherwise hard to find for those who earn low or moderate incomes. But I would be remiss to not mention that just as it has nationally, ownership and opportunity in our city also has a cruel side to its history. One of exclusion, redlining, downzonings, and other policy choices, intentional, that locked people out of neighborhoods to protect what some believe is only theirs. New York City remains, again, among the most segregated cities in the country. The stability that is at the root of our success stories has not been evenly distributed. And that challenge is one that our administration is committed to addressing, partly by doing what New York has always done, recognizing that ownership is a complex idea that can take many forms. And as a city, we can and must embrace and build upon all the forms we have here. As many of you know, we recently released Block by Block, our administration's housing plan, which will guide our housing and land use strategies during our time in office and set projects in motion that will be carried out over the next decade. While there is lots of room to iterate on the ideas together, it's a roadmap for meeting this moment with both bold ambition and what someone recently called, and I'm very proud of this, rigorous pragmatism. It recognized that solving our housing shortage means more than building buildings. It means working holistically to create a more affordable city and helping New Yorkers build stable, prosperous lives. Now, underpinning our policy approach are a few key values I want to share. First, that tenant rights are the foundation of an affordable, creative, and livable New York City. Second, that New York needs to grow, and adding more housing options for more people across a wider range of neighborhoods is critical. That we can improve life for those already here and welcome new neighbors by expanding our housing supply and new housing of all types. Third, that to address our housing challenges at scale, we need to use both public and private sector tools and resources while ensuring that the public sector is in the driver's seat and responsive to inclusive, community-driven visions. We bring these values together in what we refer to as an all-of-the-above approach. With the depth of need across the city, we truly cannot afford to leave any potential solutions on the table. Now, this is an approach that's been theoretical for many years. Amid policy debates over the right way to solve our housing challenges, different policies have often been pitted against each other. If you support new housing, you're putting tenant stability at risk. If you support tenant rights, you're discouraging development. If you support workers and better jobs, you're stymieing housing growth. While we, of course, have to make difficult decisions when allocating our scarce resources, the truth is we can and must do it all by fighting, as the mayor has said, for the tenants of today and the tenants of tomorrow. And underpinning our entire administration's approach is a commitment to public excellence, because it shouldn't take years to get a permit to begin construction or lease up an already constructed apartment to a low-income New Yorker. This does not mean cutting corners on safety or fairness. It means building the partnerships and capacity to work smarter, to be more efficient, and to do the necessary things faster. So through these approaches, Block by Block aims to bring the scale and urgency of housing solutions that New Yorkers deserve. That includes the ambitious goal of building 200,000 new affordable homes over the next decade and preserving 200,000 more over the same time period. And these goals are backed by historic levels of city capital investment, starting with $22 billion over 5 years, including $5.6 billion of investment specifically for NYCHA homes. These investments will also put New Yorkers to work. We estimate by creating 200,000 new affordable homes, this will generate an average of 30,000 construction jobs per year and nearly 13,000 permanent jobs. These are jobs in the trades, in manufacturing, in engineering, in architecture, in design, and planning, and across the many small businesses that support every project. And as we implement the Construction Justice Act, which sets a minimum wage and benefit floor for affordable housing production, we will ensure that these are good, safe, well-paid, high-quality jobs. Housing allows the rest of our economy to work. New York has always drawn the best talent, business, ideas, but that can only continue to be true if people powering that innovation can afford to live here. More affordable housing means more workers who can live close to their workplace and contribute to our city. So creating more housing near jobs and near transit helps New Yorkers reach more economic opportunities as well. That's why as we deliver more housing, we also must ensure that every part of the city, especially areas well connected to transit, are part of that growth. But jobs are only part of the story of wealth creation. I want to come back to the idea of the deeper promise of housing and how that deeper promise of housing is connected to ownership. This idea, the chance to build wealth that stays with a family or within a community and passes to future generations. This is where democratizing economic opportunity can get concrete in our plan. Through Block by Block, we're investing in affordable home ownership, protecting rent-stabilized homes, creating new affordable co-op programs, and supporting community ownership models in a way that is virtually unprecedented for a mayoral administration. One new tool for long-term ownership, which I'm sure Commissioner Levy will speak more about this afternoon or this morning, is called Our Home, a new program that builds on the Affordable Neighborhood Cooperative Program to promote co-op housing that gives tenants control and ownership over the future of their homes. We are also deepening support for community land trusts across a variety of programs. We're creating pathways for CLT ownership on existing projects and identifying public land that is suitable for transfer to CLTs. Just earlier this week, we announced the administration's first designation of a public site for affordable housing to a development team that includes This Land Is Ours CLT. And we're providing technical assistance to both new and existing CLTs so that they can succeed as long-term stewards of these projects. Finally, we're also supporting legislation to advance these goals, including the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act and the Safer Homes Act. And we're excited to be working with Councilmember Nursan Kopa to see it advance in the council. For those not familiar, this legislation would give community partners the first opportunity to buy certain distressed properties when they go on the market. If it passes, it can create an important layer of protection for tenants of distressed properties against further speculation. Now, let me say one of the hard parts out loud. $22 billion is the largest 5-year housing commitment the city has ever made. But that is just the start, and our broader vision will require us to stretch every single public dollar. We'll be working to drive down costs in what it takes to build affordable housing. We'll be developing and piloting new financing tools like our revolving smart loan, increasing density where it makes sense, and allowing cross subsidies for market rate housing to deliver affordability without a single dollar of city capital. Some of these ideas are less popular, but they are a necessary reality of our housing crisis. And none of this gets built, of course, by government alone. It gets built with people in this room, with lenders willing to take the first risk, the affordable housing developers willing to forge new partnerships and engage with social housing models, the CLTs who will steward homes for generations, and the advocates who will hold us to the highest standards of dignity and self-determination for communities, and the organizations working to innovate and create complementary tools to support economic mobility as part of that self-determination. We're only 6.5 months into the admin, and we know we have to move with urgency. So to be clear, I am not asking you to stand by and watch us do this work. I am asking you to build with us. And you have the rest of this morning to think and talk collectively about how. For generations in the city, housing and wealth have been bound together in a cycle that has lifted some families while locking out others from prosperity around us. Everything I have described today, the new homes we will build, the tenants we will protect, the NYCHA homes we want to modernize, the buildings we can preserve, the co-ops and land trusts, and first real chances at ownership we want to create, are meant to break that cycle. We want this work to create a more affordable city, but we also want it to support a growing economy while democratizing economic opportunities. Success to me looks like a child who is sleeping in a shelter tonight, having the ability to grow up here and own a piece of the neighborhood and city they choose to call home, in whatever form that might take. Not as a miracle or as an exception, but as the ordinary result of a city that decided, block by block, to build, invest, and grow for its people and those who want to call it home, and especially those who live at the margins today. That, to me, is what advancing economic mobility through affordable housing can look like. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Can we give another hand for Deputy Mayor Bozorg? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good morning. I'm Alejandra Diaz-Pizarro, and I'm a policy researcher at the Center for an Urban Future. In neighborhoods across New York City, small business closures are on the rise as these firms confront rising rents, surging insurance and utility bills, and higher prices for materials and supplies. At the same time, many CUNY students are finding it increasingly difficult to land paid internships and entry-level jobs in their fields. A CUNY AI Small Business Corps could help address both challenges at once. The city could help neighborhood firms put new tools to work by paying CUNY students to work directly with small businesses on practical AI adoption, while giving students paid real-world experience, which employers increasingly expect. In today's challenging economic landscape, small businesses could use every advantage to stay competitive. Few things hold more potential to help than AI. AI can help firms with slim profit margins reduce costs, save time, and take advantage of growth opportunities. It can help small businesses complete in hours projects or tasks that previously took weeks, from analyzing customer data to streamlining marketing. But while most of the city's largest businesses have been using AI for years, uptake rates are considerably lower for small businesses. Many small business owners aren't tech-savvy or have little or no experience using AI. Even those who have dabbled in ChatGPT or other AI tools often don't understand the specific use cases for AI that would be most helpful for their business. City leaders can solve this gap by pairing small businesses with CUNY students under a newly created CUNY AI Small Business Corps. Students could be matched with businesses in their own communities, allowing them to draw on their personal experiences, cultural knowledge, and language skills. This effort would not only boost small businesses, it would also enable CUNY students to build expertise in real-world settings and demonstrate hands-on experience applying AI at a time when employers in every industry are seeking out workers with AI skills. It would also give CUNY students a leg up in one of the most challenging job markets for young people and generations, and help ensure they leave CUNY not only with a credential, but with a clear path to a well-paying career that can launch them into the middle class. Now I'd like to invite Brandee McHale, Head of Community Investing and Development at Citi and President of the Citi Foundation, on stage to lead our first panel of the day, as well as our panelists to come up and join her. Thank you.
Wow, when I sat down before, there were so many open seats. There are a lot of you here. Okay. I guess this is a good ticket to have today on a hot day. We definitely thank you to the bank for turning on the air conditioning. You all get the benefit. People at home on webcast, I'm sorry you may not be as nice and cool in here, cool in your own home, but you're welcome to come down. Okay, so welcome. You know my favorite part about this event is that I'm about to say, hey, welcome to Citi, and everyone's gonna be confused. So let me just say, anytime I say the word Citi, I'm typically meaning C-I-T-I, not C-I-T-Y. So welcome to Citi, C-I-T-I. You know, we're all here because we share this common concern and I hope optimism around housing affordability. It is certainly one of the most defining economic issues facing communities here in New York City, but also across the US. It is shaping how households make, their life choices, their decisions today, and what those outcomes will be tomorrow. There is a lot to be done. Now, I've been working in this space for a very long time. I have the opportunity here at Citi, C-I-T-I, to be both the head of the Citi Foundation, directing our philanthropic efforts. I'm also the bank's Community Reinvestment Act officer, so I have a chance to work across our businesses to see how can we deploy a range of private sector tools to make an impact and to do our part. Now, when I thought about today, and I said, oh, I'm starting my career, I started my career focusing on housing. I actually started as a program officer in the foundation with a portfolio that was focused on affordable housing.
Conversation about the hair falling as well.
And sometimes you can sit back and say, so what have we learned? What have we accomplished? And I remind myself that the challenge continues to evolve. The thing that was so exciting to me about starting my career in this space is that nonprofit housing groups are the original social entrepreneurs.
Hear, hear.
And the entrepreneurial mindset that has been brought and the entrepreneurial energy that has been brought to not only addressing a challenge, but reinventing solutions year over year, decade after decade is really impressive and such an important component. So I'm so thrilled to be joined by this panel today.
Dina, Levy.
We all have a role to play. I will just say our institution earlier this year, we launched a new public commitment at a time when many private sector companies are actually taking a bit more of a role on the sidelines and not taking a public stand on issues. We see this as the defining issue of this moment, and we committed $60 billion in capital to enhance U.S. housing affordability. That will translate, our aim is to create 250,000 new units over the next 5 years. And as part of that, on top of that, I know 60 billion with a B is a big number. But I think for the folks in this room, what I also want to point out is we also made a $50 million philanthropic commitment, because nonprofit housing organizations, these original social entrepreneurs, are such a critical piece of the solution, such an important piece of the housing ecosystem. So we want to invest in your success and your capacity, not only to address the needs today, but just remind ourselves that this is a challenge that will continue to evolve as our economy and our society evolves. And we want solutions for today, but also with an eye towards tomorrow. So with that in mind, let me introduce what I think are the stars of this panel today, our social entrepreneurs. And I'm actually, in the interest of time, just going to ask each of them to go right down the row and just introduce yourself and the organization that you represent. I can start with you, Thomas.
Hello, good morning. I'm Thomas Yu. I'm the Executive Director of Asian Americans for Equality.
Hi, everybody. My name is Barika Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, or ANHD.
Hi, I'm Christie Peale. I lead the Center for New York City Neighborhoods.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Edward Dallas, and I'm the Director of the Interboro Community Land Trust.
Good morning. I'm Rafael Cestero. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Community Preservation Corporation.
Terrific. Thank you all. I know you have a lot of things on your plate, so we appreciate you making time to be with us today. So I think a lot of conversations we have about affordable housing and housing affordability, and I want to just point out that they're aligned, but they're not always exactly the same, because the housing crisis that we're experiencing in this country cuts across income levels right now. And if our goal is to help people move up the economic ladder, we want them to keep being able to move up the economic ladder. And so, I think, again, we want to increase the availability of affordable housing, but also recognize that there's an affordability crisis more broadly, and not have people move up just to get stuck again. So, but we do tend to think about affordable housing in terms of units and rents, and I think about it then to say we set the finish goal, and success looks like, and even our own public commitment we just made, our impact metric was 250,000 new units. And I think when we do that, it's important, but I think it sets us up to say that's the finish line. And I think we need to think about a mindset shift in our work. That's not the finish line. Getting units to market and getting families into these units, that's the starting gate when we think about housing as a tool for economic mobility. So I want to just warm things up with the panel here and ask you all, from where you sit, how do you think about this connection between housing and and economic mobility. And for this one question, we'll jump around during the panel, but maybe for this one, I'll start at the far end and we'll just go down the line. So Rafael?
Thanks, Brandee. Thrilled to be here. Look, I think your point about unit numbers and totals being the start is an excellent one. I think we have always sort of used that as the foundational metric. I do think it's important not to lose in this conversation the fact that every affordable unit created and preserved in a regulated context where people are only paying 30% of their income in rent is in itself the foundation of economic mobility. Because otherwise, they're paying 40, 50, 60, 70% of their income in rent, or they're living in a shelter, and there's no chance for economic mobility. So I don't want to downplay the importance of that beginning, right? I think it is truly important, and we can't have a conversation about economic mobility without that base. I think the next conversation that I think about in this context is how do we begin to create more opportunities for people to have ownership of housing and participate in the wealth building that goes on with ownership. And I think that there's less focus on that because of the urgency of the housing crisis and the complexity associated with financing home ownership in the affordable context.
For me, I think the numbers are great. It's always good to see more stretch goals, 200,000, 300,000, wonderful. But we also have to remember that there's a time lag between designing, developing, thinking of the housing and its actual construction. So let's say that that's a 5-year window. A lot of things can happen in 5 years that undermine the goal of economic mobility for the folks that will occupy the housing. So what do we do in the interim to keep those folks in place so that they actually will have the opportunity for this economic mobility in these units? I mean, we know that production costs go up. I think everybody that's here is involved in some level with affordable housing production, and they've seen, for instance, the cost of supply skyrocket. We also have what I consider an existential crisis in terms of property and liability insurance that's impacting in a negative way our ability to produce permanently affordable housing. But my concern is what happens between the time that you build the house, you design the housing and build it and move people into it. What are the issues? What should we do to be helping the folks that are waiting for these economic mobility opportunities? And I also wanted to just on the way here, I was thinking maybe there should be a definition. We maybe want to agree or toy with the definition of economic mobility. What is it? Is it actually moving forward? Is it moving backwards, right? You can move up, you can move down. Yeah. So when I think of economic mobility, I think of moving up, doing better than perhaps in my case, my parents, or doing better than perhaps even people in my family, or we're advancing together. So for me, economic mobility means, one, having housing that is safe, where the cost of the housing is transparent, it's predictable, it's reliable, and that it leaves me with money after I pay my housing costs, not just to cover my basic necessities, but that it also gives me money for other financial aspirations and needs. I just wanted to level set, because I said, what's economic mobility? What does it mean to everybody? That's what it means to me. So if we're truly creating housing that's for economic mobility, it's going to do more than meet bare necessities.
I really want to highlight what you said. The way I think about it is, as both a springboard, but also a safety net. Is there anything scarier than when you're actually climbing up a ladder and you slip and you think, I'm going to fall? Wow. What's going to happen? You know what? If you fall, it's really painful to get up.
That's a great analogy. Thank you.
So really, really important point. The other thing I'll just say is, in the world we live in, I'm so glad you said that you highlighted 5 years. Think about what we were doing 5 years ago. Think about how I probably weren't in a big group, that's for sure.
Wow.
Think about what it looked like 5 years ago, and think about how technology And a whole range of geopolitical issues are actually reshaping how we actually live. And so 5-year increments are sort of like how a decade was, or 20 years ago was, when our parents were where we are today. So, and I know it might have been accidental about where you sat, but I feel like the minute you talked about preservation, preserving, safety, I thought, oh, you have the best neighbors right next to you. There we go. So, you want to?
Thank you so much, Brandee, and thank you to CUF for having this conversation. It's so exciting to have housing be a part of the economic mobility conversation, and cities' work around financial empowerment and housing affordability has always been really linked, so it's great to have you leading the conversation, Brandee. When the center, which was founded in response to the foreclosure crisis, thinks about economic mobility, we think about sustainability. So our partners who help homeowners overcome temporary barriers to long-term affordable homeownership are looking usually at sort of a 30-year timeline, just like you might be looking at housing financing in the multifamily context. And we're thinking about what does affordability look like over the lifetime, over the next generation for this home and this system of owners. So we do our work through services and through capital investment through our CDFI, which is called Sustainable Neighborhoods, really because we're trying to figure out, what is that foundation of sustainability? And it's, as it is in the multifamily context, it's cash flow, right? It's income. What is the income we're going to need to maintain this over time? And if you've had a temporary income shock, whether it's from job loss, whether it's from a health issue, whether it's a loss of a family member, we're trying to figure out through the mortgage assistance program, through HAF, through other short-term capital infusions, how we can help you get over that. So for us, the economic mobility is really tied to this foundation of sustainability. If you have a sustainable and affordable and predictable housing payment through housing that you can own over your generation and the next generations, you can think about what asset growth looks like. You can think about what equity growth looks like. But without that cash flow, without that foundation, that opportunity is going to be really challenging. So it's really exciting to start to think about how to tie the conversations around economic opportunity and housing opportunity into one conversation and really integrate our approaches going forward.
Thank you. Rika?
Well, I also want to say thank you to CUF, and especially, Brandee kind of just said it as if it was a regular thing, but really want to uplift and appreciate Citi and their role and commitment and investment in this work. We are a proud 2-time community progress maker, and there's not a lot of folks out there in philanthropy who are saying, we're investing in these nonprofit organizations and we're trusting you to do the work that needs to happen on the ground. So really appreciate that investment and that commitment that Citi has been making. I think this question is kind of very core and foundational to who ANHD is. And we were created by those original nonprofit community-based entrepreneur and organizations here in New York City, including AFI, who is one of our original 8 founding orgs. But those orgs were not saying, I'm only here about housing. I'm only thinking about the units, right? They came to this work saying, what's happening in my community? What's happening in my neighborhood? There's this building that we want to repurpose for thinking about jobs, thinking about housing, thinking about community spaces, thinking about our small businesses. All of these things have always been a part of this work from the beginning. And sometimes I think what happens is we get into like our silos and our government and our funding sources and we start to like pull it apart. But before there was LIHTC and CRA and CDFIs and right, it was all one big pot. Right? And so I think some of what we have to think about when we're trying to think about home ownership and housing and economic mobilities, these things have always been intertwined. They have always been deeply connected. And to your point of the latter, Brandee and John Edward, they've never been straight and they've never been linear. Right? People have always moved back and forth. I always remember this Annie Casey study that basically said like some neighborhoods are meant to be launching pads, right? So this concept of like stability, everything has to be stable. Well, if I'm coming into the neighborhood and I'm an immigrant community, I'm getting my footing and then I'm moving to somewhere else, is that necessarily a terrible thing? But sometimes our data, our metrics say that's not good economic mobility. So I think sometimes we've really got to pull these things apart and really think about what we're trying to achieve, both with housing goals as tied to really creating opportunity for people.
Again, you did the perfect segue.
Wow.
So
Teeing me up. Yeah. Well, thank you, Citi and CUF, for holding this summit. And I think Barika and other panelists really, framed it well. The way we've always looked at economic mobility has always been part of a holistic, comprehensive neighborhood development strategy. And so the way Asian Americans for Equality, or AFE for short, we approach that is look at the neighborhood as a living ecosystem. Each of your buildings are, living organisms with the tenants and the household as the basic life unit. If you look at it that way, then you're able to kind of look at what's ailing, the neighborhood. What are we doing? What levers do we need to pull? And throughout the last 52 years, when we approached this, we started having to innovate different tools, to do that. When we saw a lot of landlord disinvestment in the Lower East Side, where our housing started, we were one of the first tax credit, developers. It was just a tenement building that we preserved with the Enterprise Foundation, right? And so, but looking at this, we start seeing, we start doing enough where now that we have 40 buildings in that neighborhood, and we start to see patterns. A lot of, let's say, New York City neighborhoods are buildings with 1 or 2 mom and pop storefronts in the bottom. So are a lot of small to medium sized property owners also depending on those businesses to offset some of the affordable rents above. And so we began to say, we need to form a CDFI to support the small businesses because they're part and parcel of the housing stability as well. And for our tenants, if they're spending, we've solved part of the equation of let's keep their disposable annual income that is spent on rent at around a 30% affordable level. What else are they spending on? The daily needs of childcare, food. Are we having that kind of small retail that's available, which also in turn create culturally relevant jobs, goods and services for our tenants? We could build a lot of affordable housing and they can't, shop or live anywhere. That's also setting them back. And as we look at the continuum of housing, I'm glad, home ownership is, on the forefront of what everyone's talking about. We started a second CDFI just specifically focus on home ownership because small business and home ownership are part of that continuum of growth. And we help pilot, the Affordable Neighborhood Cooperative Program that's currently, one of the limited equity co-op pipelines here. A lot of our neighborhood members now are bubbling up. The benefit of the grassroots is hearing, now they're saying, we heard about accessory dwelling units being allowed. How do we do that? And then working with our bank partners to say, how do you finance that? Is that a home equity line of credit? What if a senior, seeing how they actually want to use these products, a senior homeowner saying, my adult children cannot buy right now in New York City because it's so expensive. So I want to do this ADU. Can I do a reverse mortgage and use some of that equity to build it? There's all these things that we haven't really thought about in a practical way to help finance these and then using our CDFI for the gap financing. But these are the kind of what's exciting about this new administration is there's no stone left unturned and looking at everything, to say everything counts, let's do it until we can't do it, and so I think that energy and that moment, we've got to strike while it's hot, and so I think more of that, the ideas are going to come out.
So when I should say in full disclosure, I'm also, probably my most important job is I am the parent to a New York City public school teacher, and I have endless 3 a.m. nights where I think, how is he affording to live? how is he going to ever buy anything? What, you know, and he wants to stay in New York City, and he wants to stay teaching in New York City. It's like, you know, how do I support him? So so thank you. On behalf of the mother inside of me today, thank you for all that you guys are doing. But let's really talk about this, you know, affordable homeownership. One is, you know, on one hand, when I started prepping and thinking about today's event, I was thinking, well, I agree. I love this all in. There is no one size fits all approach.
That's right.
But the more different fronts we try to work on, the more complexity we have in front of us, and the resource allocation choices become even more challenging. So can I ask each of you, or whomever wants to kick us off, like, how is your organization thinking about this shift into homeownership? Is this a new area? Is this a returning issue? Also, my other thing, in full disclosure, if you work in community development, it is like fashion. There is nothing new in fashion. It's all old ideas come back again. In community development, I think we're the same way. So, like, you know, how are you? And also, I'm really curious. I want to get some insights. You each, you know, are leaders in your institutions, and how do you think about infusing this focus now on homeownership? Who wants to kick off?
I mean, I'm happy to start. Although I'm not sure I wanted to start after you referred to how nothing's new and we've all been in this a long time, because I feel like the old when Thomas, you were talking about that first project with the Enterprise Foundation. I was the project manager at Enterprise, 22 years old, and worked on that project.
I love it.
I'm feeling a little old at the moment, but you know, I think. Look, a couple of things I would say about homeownership. One, you know, we struggle, you know, the city of New York has been for 4 decades making huge and increasingly big commitments to affordable housing. We do it in New York like nobody else does it. We've always struggled to get the federal government engaged in affordable housing in a more meaningful way. But I think when you talk about homeownership, I think it's always important to remind people that the single largest housing subsidy in the federal budget is the mortgage interest deduction.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so the question I have, right, at the federal level is, how is the mortgage interest deduction as a housing subsidy being targeted? And in an environment today where you have high interest rates, it's increasingly difficult to get a mortgage, the beneficiaries of the mortgage interest deduction are increasingly higher income and wealthier. I think that's one piece of the homeownership equation that I think we've never fully appreciated or from a housing policy perspective or learned from. I think the second piece of it is CPC is the largest lender in the Affordable Neighborhood Co-op program. We lend on all kinds of co-ops over 50 years of doing this. But I want to see homeownership programs that are also about allowing people to build wealth and wealth creation. And I think too often the homeownership programs we create focus on the other goal, which is housing stability. And so to Barika's point, if all we're focused on is housing stability, then are we really creating economic mobility and maximizing housing's ability to create, to be a part of economic mobility? And I bring up the mortgage interest deduction because that is a huge economic mobility a tool that the federal government applies and has created this sort of unequal system in homeownership.
I'd love to piggyback on this.
Yeah.
That's a great segue for it. Well, I run a community land trust, so the only thing we think about is permanently affordable housing for low and moderate income households, individuals, families. And what we also do is we want to make sure that folks get the mortgage interest deduction, but there's a different spin on our model about economic mobility. You're building wealth not only for yourself and the next generation, but our model is a shared equity model. So you're also sharing that wealth with a future generation. So one of the best aspects about the CLT model is that, for instance, when the city, and we hope they put more money into CLTs, Mayor Mondami said that he was open to the idea of setting up a trust fund for CLTs. And I want to call out, yes, we love to see a $50 million trust fund for CLTs so we can acquire more properties. But the fact is that when the city puts a subsidy into a CLT-based home, that subsidy is retained. It's not extracted. So based on resale restrictions for the co-op units and for the homes, that initial subsidy is passed on, is retained from homeowner through homeowner. So it's a great bang on the buck. And it also turns the wealth building model, the economic mobility model on its head because, and this bothers some folks, right? Because you're not just building wealth for yourself, you're also helping someone else build wealth. That's almost antithetical to our model here in the country, right? When you own a home, a market rate home, it's all yours. The land is yours, the air rights are yours, everything is yours. This model means that you get a wealth building opportunity that can bring about economic mobility, but you're also helping someone else down the line.
Let me just ask you one question. How do you feel like community land trusts are picking up steam? Or are they?
I think they absolutely are. When you look at where we were started in 2016, Cooper Square has been around a long, long time as well. And at this point in time, we have, I think there are either 25 or more CLTs in formation here. They're picking up a lot of steam. We're also learning a lot of lessons, right? Because it's a new model here, being employed in very innovative and dynamic ways. So yeah, it's picking up a lot of steam, but there are challenges. And I'll talk about some of the challenges.
We'll come back to that
later on. But because the mortgage interest deduction, that's something that a CLT homeowner could have, but they also have the benefit of helping another homeowner down the line build wealth as well. So we think it's a great model.
Great.
Well, at the center, we think about affordable homeownership as a multi-tool, like a Swiss Army knife. You need all of the different tools on the knife, right? You need equity building solutions. You need tools that help people navigate our very competitive market. Everybody knows how unaffordable the New York City homeownership market is and how people are looking in farther neighborhoods outside of the city. You need policy tools, looking at the federal government. I think where we want to put our capital in DC is trying to get new investment tools that will help the city's investment in affordable homeownership go farther. I think maybe getting Congress to look at the mortgage interest deduction and have it be more beneficial on an income-based level makes a lot of sense, Rafael. But most people that don't deduct their income taxes don't benefit from the mortgage interest deduction, as you mentioned. So it is not a progressive benefit. It's the reverse, and it doesn't have the same impact in New York that it probably does in other parts of the country. But we could get the federal government to think about what an equity investment that would spur new development of affordable homeownership to create new wealth building opportunities. They don't have to be built on a land trust. They could be built the way the partnership homes were. My first job in housing was marketing partnership homes, and it was like the best experience to go through these household financial pictures and to understand how people have been, saving day by day, month by month to come up with that down payment, and then to see over time how the 20,000 units that the partnership developed not only helped build neighborhoods, but allowed families to build wealth. So we know that those tools are really critical. We know Interboro is really critical. Thank you to Citi for helping launch Interboro. And we also know that when folks go out and try and navigate the market with tools like the City's Home First program, which is, I think, the most, it is the richest down payment assistance program in the entire country. It's an amazing program, and we need to make those dollars go farther and really think about who we're trying to help get over that barrier, right? It's not the people that are benefiting from the mortgage interest deduction, right? It's the people that have been locked out of the New York City ownership market. It's people who have been systemically and locked out of homeownership for generations based on discrimination. There's just a huge need to be very targeted in who we're trying to help, but have every tool on that Swiss Army knife to intervene and help people either get into a starter home, which is what Interboro offers, and community land trust, they offer that starter home opportunity. And that's what we're missing in the New York market. And we really need to figure out how to develop new homeownership opportunities at scale to create efficiency, to create cheaper units so we can have more starter homes for the teachers in our school system, and also to call on our employers, right? A lot of really strong employers help their employees buy homes through employer-assisted housing. And this is a great place for CUF to take the lead and show that connection. I'm not sure what the Department of Education or the Teachers Union does for their employees trying to get started out, but they could do what they do in Philly, which is a match, right? You could come up with a lot of strategies like they do in Chicago. There's a great way to say our employers can be part of our home equity building engine, or even just rental affordability by making targeted investments in their employees' abilities to own and rent.
Yeah, those vacant buildings that we have, some of these vacant city buildings that we have, maybe great employer-sponsored housing. Yeah.
I really love that you talked about scale, Christie, because I think one of the challenges around homeownership, especially here in New York City, is the scale question. And to your point, Brandee, of like RCLTs gaining steam, I think we would all probably say yes. And I think one of the reasons is these community-based solutions, many of which are old, right? I was a project, Rafael, to your point, I was a project manager on a TOPA project in DC 20 plus years ago. So it's not brand new, right? But I think one thing that we are all recognizing is that we can't just do this like one household at a time, right? That scale is not going to keep pace with the problem. I think one of the places that has very much here in New York City, very much like shined a light and amplified just how problematic it is to not have a place-based, intentional, very much scaled thought about homeownership is Black Central Brooklyn. Because if you let it go, that's it, right? That is, we've dropped what? We've dropped like 15%. That's not right. The numbers are bigger. I can't do them off the top of my head. But massive loss in Black middle class across Central Brooklyn, massive erosion of Black home ownership across Central Brooklyn. And in part, that's because a lot of our policies are like one person at a time, one homeowner at a time. And that's because this work is hard and you kind of do have to do it one by one. But also there's a different question of like, can we approach all of this just like building 1453 and then go over to building 2022 and then like one by one kind of whack-a-mole? And I think there's like some broader scale appreciation of how much that is not working here in New York City, but also across the country. It's really not working that well anymore. And it used to feel like homeownership was the place that you didn't have to worry as much about that, right? That there was a certain level of stability, security, you own the home, your mortgage, you're not seeing these pressures. That is very interestingly changing, not just here. There's some great pieces around Houston, Austin, some other places where people are being now what they're calling double displaced. They were gentrified out of their core downtowns into the suburbs. They're being re-gentrified out of their suburbs, right? So I think the idea that you're moving out of the city, being renters, into being homeowners in New York City, that's not leaving the city all the time, does not mean that there's now this sense of stability or security anymore. And that people are really feeling different pressures. Sometimes making choices, but sometimes also feeling pressures and being pushed out.
No, I'm glad you talked about the attrition of like the middle class and what John Edward, you talked about, like mobility goes both ways, and so I think if you look at a lot of typical homeowners nowadays, if they were renters, they'd be considered rent burdened, like just the amount of disposable like income they're spending on the mortgage, maintenance, other things. And we've noticed that on a neighborhood scale. We just experimented, 3-4 years ago on a little project where we took $1 million that came to us, and we basically went out to neighborhoods with low density homeowners, and they were facing repairs that they didn't have capital for from like 2 or 3 hurricanes ago. And they have an extra unit that they could rent out. And they were, it was at the same time in the previous administration where we had something like 7,000 emergency housing vouchers we had to use or return to the federal government. And so these kind of mostly outer borough homeowners were more than willing to take a voucher, tenant. And sometimes the solution is very practical. We went there and said, we have $20,000 to $30,000 in grant money. We'll just fix up your unit so that it passes a Section 8 voucher inspection. We're not giving you like, the state of the art, thing, but it's to get you, to that level. And then they pledge to take a voucher referral. And so now the homeowner benefits, the tenant who is exiting a shelter but could not find a place to rent benefits. And as a CDFI focusing on homeownership, we said, well, now you have a steady income stream that we can further underwrite for all the other work that you needed for your house that we couldn't pay with the grant. So that's like, one way where renters and homeowners are actually more intertwined than you think sometimes, and the solution is there. It's the same story with that's the same thing with why ADUs make sense, And partly we had a surge in homeownership education and technical assistance resources after the financial crisis in 2008, but that's dried up, and partly because homeownership is so out of reach, right? In New York City, we focused on other things, but I've seen a whole new generation of immigrants who have come to this country. Some of the issues that are coming to our homeownership counselors are like, what's the difference between a co-op and a condo? They have no idea you need they should ask for an offering plan before they give their life savings in cash. We had to go do an emergency intervention and acquire a building with loan acquisition fund because the developer defrauded them. They didn't know you were supposed to have all that. And there's this whole generation of also home buyers who are putting down all cash that they pooled with extended families and purchasing in neighborhoods that were hit by floods. But because they're paying in all cash, there's no trigger for flood insurance. So they don't know. It's going to hit them in the next hurricane and they're going to lose all their assets. So we need these kind of to use a construction term, backflow preventers, from people sliding back. And that's going to be their biggest nest egg. And we can't waste all the effort as well as their sweat and capital, for them to lose it all again.
Let's stay on this issue and talk about this a little bit. John, over to you,
Well, I was just thinking, I'm sorry, I got stuck on the question of how to expand access to ownership for, home ownership for low and moderate income. And Barika mentioned something about, you can't do it piecemeal, one here, one there. And so could one of the solutions to this be more conversions of buildings rather than do new construction? We can do more conversions of rental units to low, HDFCs or limited equity co-ops. That might be a solution. They're already there, and we have COPA, right? We hope COPA gets passed, and TOPA. Let's give the residents of those buildings that want to move forward, for home ownership. Let's give them that opportunity. That's one way to do it. No new construction involved. There may be subsidies needed to do the conversion, to do rehabs, but the residents are already there, and if they vote in favor of it, this is a path for, and not just low income, in some cases, they may be even very low income, to give them to move from rental, serfdom, to move from homeowners.
And I would add to that, sort of thinking about broader economic mobility. What other scaffolding programs and practices are we putting in place, right? The national data on low-income households' ability to incur an unexpected expense is shocking and terrifying.
Yeah.
Most people nationally can't absorb more than a $1,700 unexpected expense. $1,700, right? So if you're becoming a new co-op owner, a new homeowner, that's, to Thomas's point, that's a lot of things that can happen.
Yes.
Right? So all of a sudden you need to replace your boiler. All of a sudden you need a new roof. All of us, right? And to me, it's very funny. I'd always, Leila talked about NYCHA. It always feels like it connects back to this interesting NYCHA conversation of having very valuable assets, but not actually having the money to be able to do the work and the repair, to be able to consistently maintain it. Right? And so I think we also need to think about as we are trying to lift up and create programs for low and moderate income households to become homeowners, how are we going to stick with them over time?
Yes.
Because it's not just a, you're there tomorrow, good luck, do great, because Rafael's gonna come and be like, you gotta pay me, right? Like, did you,
Me?
right? Like, not Rafael specifically, right? But you have to think about the financing, you have to think about, right? And you can't put people in a position where they can't do that.
In fairness to him, we're going to come first and say,
Yes, that's fair, right? That's fair. That's fair. It's you first and then Rafael.
But this is where a CLT is a good model, right? I mean, because of stewardship, right?
I guess I'd like to ask the question of what's the goal?
Yeah.
Because if the goal is resident control, resident decision-making, resident engagement in the buildings that they live in, that goal can be achieved multiple different ways in a rental context or in a homeownership context. If the goal is, and if that's the goal, then I think we can, if the goal is economic mobility, then I think that's a different question, and it's a different set of questions. And I think the history of, and the history of, this is going to be controversial, but the history of the financial success of limited equity cooperatives is not that great. They've struggled. They've had a hard time, maintaining their buildings. Expenses go up. They have to raise, the common charges on themselves. Like, these are real issues. It gives them control, but is that really the right? And is that the same thing as economic mobility? And I think that's the thing that I struggle with. We've had, in the history of housing policy in New York City over the last 40 years, of which I've been around it a lot of that, we've had a lot of different homeownership programs that nowadays people would say didn't work or they didn't like. But I also think, and some of that has been cooperative stuff, the New York City Housing Partnership, right? We had land back then, we don't have land now. That's a humongous constraint to scale, right? Nehemiah, the New York City Housing Partnership, these programs all created homeownership opportunities. They didn't have the density that everybody wants now, but not everybody wants density, and people are legitimately making choices. So I think we have to ask ourselves, what's the goal of the homeownership strategy that we're employing? And is it simply resident control, or is it economic mobility, asset building, and wealth creation? Because those things I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying we oftentimes in housing policy make the choice, and it's more weighted one way or the other. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what are we trying to accomplish, and then think about the strategy that way.
I'm glad Rafael raised that and basically, let that cat out of the bag. That we had a plot of land in Corona where we just had a deed restriction where the buyer must not make more than, in that case, 165% AMI. We purchased that land from HPD in a disposition sale. And so we saw in some cases smaller buildings that were limited equity co-ops fail, right? Because they didn't have enough scale to deal with some of the rising expenses. And in that case specifically, it really was a bad example of like tenants who couldn't work together after the UHAB of the world's left, and they didn't have someone like really organizing them, and just life happens. It takes a lot. Even like market rate co-ops, it's like a pain in the butt, right, to run. And so in that case, we just said, let's make an affordable condo structure instead, And there's benefits to that in a way where some buildings may be better if we did what if we introduced a affordable condo structure? The advantage is that let's make every unit a separate tax lot. So if there was one tenant in small buildings that just didn't pay their maintenance, it doesn't jeopardize the equity and the sweat equity of the entire co-op. You see whole co-ops foreclose, and the other responsible, homeowners have no, power to stop it because there were too few units to spread out the maintenance costs. But with the condo structure, it's just that unit, but they still exercise control, as you say, through their condo. But condo boards are just as involved as co-op boards, right? And so that's one way to look at it, and we did it, and we sold it, and they're running, and it works. So that's like a micro experiment we did. And so when an unnamed Jersey municipality approached us and said, "We saw you do ANCPs out here. Would you help us craft that program there?" And we said, "Well, do you care if it's a co-op or not?" It's like, "No, then do limited condos, just for the ease and preservation of equity,
Well, I just wanted to add a point though. I mean, look, I don't think we should try to consider throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. I mean, there have been many HDFCs or limited equity co-ops that have not passed muster, they fail. But there have been many others, countless others, that have been success stories, and we have lots of them in the city, I think over 1,000, and they're doing well. So it may not be the model for everyone, but it should be an option for building. It should always be there if we want to have economic mobility. The difference between folks that are in a building that, let's say you have an MHA, where the renter, they're not actually owners in the strictest sense of, they have a say. But one of the big pluses of having an HDFC or limited is that you have an asset. You have something that you can pass on to your children, to your family, that has a cash value that may not be the case with some of the other, the other models. But I just want to emphasize though that there have been many limited equity co-ops that have been successful, and we should turn to them for lessons on how they've succeeded.
Well, if we could also get an Article 11 for affordable condos, that would be great. So that's part of the reason that people go to the co-op model. Right. We don't have an Article 11. So that would be a great place for us to innovate and add it. Go ahead.
That would be.
But Rafael, I think your question is right, because I think sometimes what we do is we come up with policy solutions and we try to throw everything into them. And really there's a question of what are we trying to solve for with Program A? Not Christmas tree, 85 things on it, right? Which is what we all oftentimes end up doing. But what do we actually want to solve for? If the thing that we want to create is more intergenerational wealth, then we've got to be thinking about succession up front, right? If the thing that we're trying to solve for is for somebody to come in and have $30,000 worth of assets and to come out and have $300,000 worth of assets, then that's a different thing, right? And that actually doesn't work with some of the models that say limited equity and limited value, right? And then if what we're trying to say is we actually want to say we are choosing to be in this value capped environment, to John Edwards' point, and that's what we're opting into, that's another set of policy tools. I think sometimes we're throwing them all together and pretending that they're all the same thing. Not you, right? But exchanging them, right? And really being clear about what's the difference. And I think a lot about this. It reminds me a lot of what comes out in the rental conversation, where so much, 15, 20 years ago was move people with vouchers into high income neighborhoods and it'll be amazing and that's the solution. And then the data came back and it was actually, this does not work the way we think it does, right? The nature of just dropping somebody in low and moderate income into a high opportunity neighborhood and saying great, they'll achieve success just really didn't bear out. So I think some of this actually, we've really tangled with what are we trying to get to with these different home ownership tools? And then I think the control piece is giving people, to Thomas's point, enough information to really exercise which one they want to choose for themselves. And what I do worry about is sometimes we're choosing, pushing, whether it's government, philanthropy, nonprofits, we all have the thing that like becomes the like, oh, this is what everybody wants to do. It's really great. It's the sexy policy. We're going to put all our money behind it. Like, then we're kind of pushing people into an option that may not be right for them, right? So how are we actually giving them a menu?
And Brika, to piggyback on that, when we're talking about limited equity co-ops or any form of shared home ownership, you know, the folks have to really know what they're getting into. They have to really, you have to sit them down and let them know that there's sweat equity involved here, in the sense that you have to give up your time for this to work. That the end goal here is not simply economic mobility, wealth creation, but there's responsibility, there's work that you have to do to make this happen. And we know that that's challenging everywhere. I've been on co-op boards before, and it's the same 0.1% of the folks that are on those boards year after year, because everybody wants the economic mobility, the wealth accumulation, but nobody wants to do the work. And so we have to really be clear with folks that take that a limited equity model, that there's work for you to do, and that's what your success is dependent on here. And if you can't do it, let's not move forward.
Well, our time is almost, we're almost at the end.
That went fast.
I know. And you guys made it so easy for me. I just let you, it's like I'm just hanging out, listening to you guys do your thing. We're all hanging out, listening to you do your thing. I will say a couple things I've heard is that we don't have a shortage of ideas.
Right.
But in some ways, that's a challenge also, because we have to not only build the public will for these things, but what I've also heard interspersed in here is we have to build trust with the actual households and individuals that are going to be homeowners, and there's a lot to be done. So there's a lot to be done to create the housing, to get people into the housing. I'm gonna put Cuff on the hook for a follow-up event on how do we keep people in housing.
Yes.
Because this isn't just a financial equation. We're living in a moment with, we didn't have a chance to talk about the rise of financial scams and all sorts of new things that are happening out there that can quickly deplete people, not only of the benefit of home ownership and that wealth, but actually take them off that. They will break their legs and not be able to get back on that ladder again. So lots to do. But we certainly have some of, like, you each had such specific ideas and a wealth of experience. I cannot thank you enough for today. I would like to, though, put a motion on the table that because of all the good ideas you've put on here, I don't think that the Center for an Urban Future is actually a center. I think these events, you are a catalyst for an urban future. And these are our key sparks that are the catalyst. So thank you all for being that in our world, in our community. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, Norfolk and Rivington. Yeah, that's what we're born and raised.
I wish you had gone first. I know, you guys already did it all, so.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you. I'm the Lower East Sider. Yeah.
We still have program to go, so if they want to grab their seats, but we're going to keep going.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Great. We are going to continue with our program. I am here to deliver Cuff's third idea pitch. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sherry Wang. I'm a partner at the Visteria Group, where we focus on investing in affordable housing across the country. Today, I'm speaking as a proud Cuff board member, and I'm excited to deliver our pitch about affordable homeownership, which obviously the panel before me just spoke about in great detail. Especially in New York City, building housing is urgent work. We need far more homes of every kind, especially affordable rental housing. However, like the panel before me talked about in great detail, if city leaders want to narrow New York City's growing wealth gap and create housing stability, we need to increase the pace and the scale of affordable homeownership. Barika in particular, Barika from ANHD, talked about the scale, how it's difficult to accomplish one at a time. And I think, like Thomas said, the iron is hot, so we should strike while the city administration is focused on creative ways to increase access to affordable homeownership. Over the past 2 decades, there's been a growing disparity in homeownership levels. Over the past 2 decades, the number of Black homeowners has actually dropped by 15%. Today, just a quarter of Black households and 17% of Latino households own their homes in the city. That's compared to 45% of Asian New Yorkers and 42% of white New Yorkers. The good news is that New York City has decades, 40 or 50 years, of promising programs to build on. But they remain still relatively small scale compared to the ambitious programs that the city has for affordable multifamily rental housing. To change this, we urge the Mamdani administration and City Council to launch an affordable homeownership initiative with 2 clear goals. Number 1, helping 5,000 lower-income households become first-time homeowners. And number 2, helping 5,000 current homeowners preserve their homes by the end of 2028. They could start by scaling what works. We heard about a lot of the programs, expanding Home First down payment assistance, doubling Open Doors support for newly built affordable homes, expanding foreclosure prevention programs, launching the Our Home effort to create permanently affordable co-ops, and fully funding Home Fix 2.0 so that more lower-income homeowners can make needed repairs and stay in their homes. But the city could also think beyond that. Policymakers should leverage neighborhood plans and create more affordable homeownership opportunities from White Plains Road to Sunnyside Yards. They should expand shared equity models like we heard about that allow families to build assets while preserving affordability for the next buyer. They should consider pooled emergency savings programs to help homeowners manage unexpected life events. And they should consider a multi-generational homeownership initiative to help lower-income homeowners preserve wealth and age in place with family. There is no question that tackling the city's housing crisis will require building and preserving far more rental housing. However, city leaders should be similarly ambitious about helping more families build wealth through home ownership and remain rooted in their communities. Now, I'm delighted to introduce HPD Commissioner Dina Levy and CUF Editorial and Policy Director Leila Dworkin. Thank you.
Commissioner, come on, join me. Where do you want me? We got you right there, and I'll sit right here. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Is that enough, do you think, to get started? Good morning, everyone.
Try again.
All right, that's a little better.
It's freezing in here. You know why?
Maybe we can crank the heat up and everybody will get a little more animated. No, it's such a thrill to see such an amazing room of folks. I'm Leila Dworkin, the Editorial and Policy Director at the Center for an Urban Future. It is my great pleasure to be joined today by New York City's Housing Preservation and Development Commissioner, Dina Levy. Dina, welcome. Thank you so much for taking some time out of building and preserving hundreds of thousands of units of housing to spend a few minutes with us today. We
My
really
great
appreciate
pleasure, and really enjoyed what I heard of the last panel.
Yes, I think it set us up really well to dig in a little deeper. So first, congratulations to you and your team for launching Block by Block, this ambitious new housing plan for New York City. There is so much in there. You've talked about this, the Deputy Mayor talked about this as an all of the above strategy. So we won't get into the all of the above today in 20 minutes or so. There's a lot of pieces in there, but I want to zoom in on a couple of those pieces. Sure. And as that last panel talked about, and by the way, can we get one more round of applause for that amazing panel? And such thoughtful insights. And special thanks also to Brandee, McHale for supporting today's event, to her colleagues at Citi, and for leading that conversation. One of the things that conversation surfaced was some of these ideas around the role that home ownership should play in our city's housing strategy. And I think also some of the tension between creating long-term affordability and equity building. How do we have affordable housing if we're also allowing housing to appreciate? How do we balance those interests? So I wanted to start by asking you, Dina, how does home ownership fit into the city's housing strategy? What role should ownership play, and how do you think about it?
Yeah, it's great, a lot, great. So I would say, and Sherry sort of touched on this, before I came to the job at HPD, I was leading a lot of the homeownership work for the state of New York, and those issues are the same at the state as they are in the city. It's, a little bit different because we have a lot of markets outside of New York City. I would say it was very important to me personally and to a number of the folks at HPD that homeownership play a pretty central role in the block-by-block housing plan. I think it is true, it is a majority renter city, but homeownership is something we hear about all the time, particularly in outer boroughs, as something we need to put more attention to. So I was very, very proud that we had a doubling of the commitment for our new construction homeownership program. I think Sherry mentioned it, it's called Open Door. But probably the most, well, a couple exciting things, but one of the most exciting things was a new program called Our Home, which Sherry also referenced. This is a new term sheet that is specifically dedicated to allowing for conversion of rental buildings to affordable shared equity cooperatives. Maybe we'll explore condos. I was listening to what Thomas said about that. It is the first time, I think, maybe in decades, certainly since the third-party transfer program was birthed, that there is a specific dedicated door or program to allow for tenants to make the collective decision that they want to convert their homes into home ownership. So I think, you know, that is really exciting and somewhat overdue for the city. I think, you know, we'll get more into the question of the tension here about building affordable home ownership, but also allowing for wealth building. One of the other things I think we're focused on is increasing our down payment assistance, and we're actually looking at some interesting models around that question related to things like interest buy-downs. So the difference for us when you're talking about down payment assistance or even interest buy-downs, which is very interesting because of some analysis we've done that shows that that actually makes affordability like far greater than just giving folks a check for down payment assistance. But what that does is allow us to go direct to consumer with a subsidy that is typically less than it costs to build a new unit, but gives them an edge to be competitive in the open market. It also allows over time, because we are spending less subsidy, to let the beneficiaries of that increase equity. In other words, they're not restricted in the same way for the same period of time. So it really does get to this question of like building equity for individuals and allowing them to compete in an open market.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear, Dina. I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, in part because of something that Barika said on the last panel. She was talking about the challenge of bringing any of this to scale. You know, and when I look at the data, certainly when you compare the city's efforts to help, you know, build, subsidize, invest in affordable rental housing, it really is an order of magnitude and then some greater than what the city has been able to do historically around homeownership. You know, talking about serving dozens or hundreds of New Yorkers a year versus building thousands of units. So how do you think about that challenge when it comes to scale? You know, you have a lot of work to do to create and subsidize and support the development and preservation of hundreds of thousands of units of housing for renters. So how do you think about the challenge of taking programs that historically have served dozens of New Yorkers and helping them grow?
I mean, there's a couple answers. The first thing I would say is, while I do appreciate that we do need to get to scale, I think, you know, we don't want the fact that we can't do everything be a reason not to do anything, right? So, and I do think we need to sort of test some things to figure out what their efficacy is before we try to bring them to scale. So it is true, down payment, while less expensive than new construction, costs money, and there are limited amounts of money available for all of these programs. I do think this sort of innovation around buying down interest. So when I was at the state and I was leading Sunny Mae, which is the state of New York mortgage agency, we created a 2% mortgage and found that that makes the housing for the same amount. Like if I gave you $50,000 to go put a down payment, that same $50,000 could buy down your interest, making your monthly payment significantly less than if I had just given you the down payment. So that's ways to stretch our resources in ways maybe that we haven't thought about enough before. So yes, I do think we need to get to scale. I think, you know, clearly what we'll be able to do in the next couple of years, while doubling what we've done in the past 2 years, is not enough. It is a meaningful step in the right direction towards, you know, expanding the city's commitment to homeownership and to both stability and mobility.
That's great. Well, let's talk about maybe another element of that plan, this idea of shared equity. You know, tell us a little bit more. I mean, when you think about how that fits into this agenda, the balance of, you know, of market rate, affordable, market rate housing and affordable housing, both rental and ownership opportunities, with ownership opportunities where you know that appreciation is restricted, where there's, you know, caps on the sale price. How do you think about that as part of this overall housing strategy? How does that fit into the economic mobility goals of our housing policy?
I mean, you're sort of touching on a couple things there. I think the first is, again, this tension that we keep coming back to between wanting to create generationally affordable housing so that it's passed on to the next buyer and the next buyer and the next buyer. And then wrestling with the fact that that is obviously limiting the amount of equity that somebody can earn in a limited equity cooperative, for example. I mean, I think one of the pieces that are really tough for me personally, and I'm speaking more for myself here than I am for anything else, is, there is a debt owed to, I think, communities of color who have, if you just look back, you can go all the way back to redlining when it was like a policy to, deny people of color access to home ownership. But also then when you layer in what happened in 2008 and the wealth that was lost because of the financial crisis, particularly in the Black community, and then COVID, right? You can just see that there's constantly, every 10, 15, 20 years, there's something that is setting back this opportunity for, the American dream of home ownership, particularly for communities of color. So that is a tension that I think we need to pay attention to and try to figure out what the right balance is. When I was at the state, we sort of split the baby and said, we're gonna have a term sheet that allows for equity growth. And the sort of way we'll sort of make that justified is we'll create a flip tax, right? So if you can sell it for whatever it's worth, but some of that money comes back. And then we had a different model that we said, no, we want this to have like measured growth, 2%, 3%, 4% equity a year for every year you live there. And then the next generation will have an affordable home. So I think we are very open to trying to sort of recognize that these things are in tension, but also make space for both.
No, that's really encouraging. And I think, the data that Sherry mentioned points out the enormous and growing gaps in terms of home ownership, the fact that we've lost 15% of our Black homeowning families in New York City over the past 20 years. But the other part of the data that really jumps out at me is how that impacts the growth in wealth inequality in New York City. The median Black household's family wealth is about $3,000. The median Latino household, effectively $0. And it's not an accident then that you also see the lowest rates of home ownership in those populations. So definitely we see the connection there. I'm encouraged to hear you talk about both options. You talk about splitting the baby. I think the lesson there is, of course, that somebody's got to give up the baby. But I think you're saying, hey, you could actually have two babies. Right. So that's encouraging. And I wanted to ask you then a little bit more broadly, Dina, about other ways that you can see New York City leveraging our housing policy to help drive economic mobility. And I'm thinking about, we talked about shared ownership models and other home ownership opportunities. I also think about the multi-billion-dollar opportunity that is contracting around our affordable housing ecosystem. How many opportunities are there for those dollars to help support small businesses and immigrant and minority communities to be able to help grow those businesses? Or other opportunities where you see our housing policy potentially being able to better drive economic mobility. What do you see as the other opportunities there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple that we heard a lot earlier about the innovations, and there's no shortage of ideas, and I think that's true, and sometimes maybe too many ideas. So we need to sort of maybe hone our focus a little bit. I think for me right now, there's sort of two interesting things. One actually is, we haven't talked about it, but there's also the need for building better stability and better economic mobility in the rental stock, right? And one of the ways I think we think a lot about that now is removing speculation from that market. That's hard, and we're not in the same environment we were in 10 years ago when that was really placing hundreds of thousands of rental units at risk, but there still is a fair amount of speculation. And so I think HPD is starting to think a lot about how we put a value or a premium on making sure that our rental housing is going to, nonprofit motivated stewards in some cases. So that can be nonprofits, it could be shared equity cooperatives, it could be community land trusts, which we know are getting like super hot right now, right? There's a land trust pretty much on every block these days, but it's really all driven to the same thing, which is trying to remove speculation from like affordable, stabilized housing, which then I think presents ways to keep people more economically safe. And I would say, we've seen that. And I think that again, how HPD sends a message out to the world that is something we prioritize, I think is really important. On the other side, I think we're also talking to for-profit developers, many of whom are dedicated to affordable housing, and looking at interesting models there, including things like profit sharing. So if a building is performing well and rents are being paid and the building is appreciating, could tenants in some way basically share in that appreciated value through some type of equity stake in the building. And we're actually having some really interesting conversations with for-profit developers who I think are really interested in exploring whether you necessarily need to own the building to share in the profit of a building that operates and functions well. I'd say the last bit is, and this is sort of, this is the big one for me, is how are we going to start to drive down the cost of building both rental and home ownership units in the city? It is really the great challenge, right? If we are going to continue having to spend, I don't know if folks know, but $600,000-$700,000 a unit in subsidy just to build a unit is going to be really hard to get to the kind of scale that you're asking about. We are hopeful. Sometimes I feel a little bit like Charlie Brown in the football because we keep trying and don't quite get there, but we are hopeful about new models and things like off-site construction. Again, just to reflect on an example at the state, right as I was leaving, we were trying something with a manufactured housing producer called a cross-mod, where we were able to build an 1,800 square foot, 3-bed, 2-bath home, front porch, and attached garage, all in $250,000, delivered to the site and ready for sale. The state is now expanding that effort by $100 million. It was a huge, to build a home ready for sale for $250,000 in New York City would be game changing. So I think we have to keep exploring new models and figure out what controls are driving these costs up and what do we do collectively to bring them down so that we can build more housing and get more people into that housing so that they can build wealth and stability.
Well, it's so heartening to hear about that progress at the state level, and I think the idea of a $250,000 home in New York City would probably blow a lot of minds.
Mine too.
For good reason. Right. But it also, you bring up, I think, another related point, which is we can only do so much to build affordable housing, whether that's for renters or for home ownership opportunities, given the scale of the subsidy required. Yeah. It's just such an enormous task given the cost. So one whole thread of that conversation, a policy conversation, can and obviously is right now focusing on how do you bring down the cost. Yep. But one other piece of it that seems equally important then is how do you preserve the affordable housing that we've got? That's a bigger conversation. But when I think about the economic mobility piece, I think there's at least two connections there. One is obviously if you're able to help folks maintain affordable housing that they've already got, that gives them a floor of stability for economic mobility, whether that's through education, through workforce training, through entrepreneurship or other things. The second piece I think about is how do we as a city preserve more of that is actually owner-occupied today? We write a lot at the Center for an Urban Future about the city's future. Well, one of the things that defines the city's future is we're aging rapidly as a city. Our older adult population has grown by about a third over the past decade. How do we keep pace with those changes? So my question for you is around what else can the city be doing to preserve those assets that folks already have? For that aging homeowner in Queens all of whose assets are locked up in that home, who wants to pass it down to the next generation, but has to put a new roof on the house in order to get insurance next year. Doesn't have the cash to be able to do something like that. Where do you see the opportunities for the city to help owners preserve more of that wealth that they've got, to be able to ensure that can be preserved, in particular in those low-income communities and communities of color that have faced the greatest systemic barriers to acquiring that asset in the first place? You heard a little bit from Brandee earlier about the growth of other scams, affecting homeowners. We've heard a lot recently as a city about challenges around not only foreclosure prevention but deed theft. So how do you tackle those challenges?
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
I think it's really important, and I'm glad you raised it, because I do think preserving and helping existing homeowners stay in place is really, really critical. In the housing plan, and I think Sherry already mentioned it, there is a program that we run called Home Fix, and I'll be honest, right, it should be easy, right? Somebody's got a $50,000 roof that needs repair or a boiler, we should be able to do that quickly. It hasn't been functioning as quickly as it should, and I think one of the things we're really focused on is what have we done as a government, and I think you're seeing this in things like the speed report. What have we done as a government to make these things not easy to access? People are don't really know how to get to us. We don't know, why does it take so long? Why do you have to upload so many documents just to get a grant to fix your roof? So I think one of the things we really need to focus on is how to bring the tools that we do have available, and we do have funding for this Home Fix program, to the community faster, more streamlined, easier. Don't make it so hard. If you're a senior and you have to jump through 1,000 hoops, people just get tired and give up. So I think one of the things is really that is within our control, and one of the themes that I've been really focused on is fixing what is within our control. So making those programs operate more directly and cleanly is definitely a high priority. The other thing that we brought back in the housing plan, that's something I actually worked on when I was at the Attorney General's office, is a program that actually the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, Christie Peale, who was here, launched, called MAP, which is the Mortgage Assistance Program. It's actually broader than that. It is basically a loan grant program meant to help homeowners with very small or medium small balance, water debt, tax debt, mortgage debt, get current and avoid foreclosure. And the value of that is just incredible, right? If it costs me $50,000 to keep somebody in their home, and then you look at the cost to the city, to everybody to like see a 5-year foreclosure play out, it is so clearly smarter to make that investment up front. And we have found, because the program's now been operating for a number of years, that once you make that sort of lifeline for somebody to help them stay in their home, they generally retain the home for a really long period. So in the housing plan, you'll see new money dedicated specifically for sort of advancing, it hasn't been funded in a number of years, this mortgage assistance program, which will also be an intervention to help people get current on taxes, water, all of those things. So I think that's a really critical, important piece, and I think we need to think about other strategies, especially as we talk about whether or not the lien sale will be coming back and like whether or not that's a good idea and what should we be doing for single family homeowners to make sure they are not being treated in a disparate way on these types of tax collection issues. So we're very excited to really refocus our efforts through something like we have something called the Homeowner Help Desk. It's another place where I think we need to tighten things up because people call and they're not really sure which program they're looking for. So there's a lot more we need to do, but I do think there's a huge amount of energy coming out of the agency right now to make sure that we are preserving the affordable homeownership that we already have while thinking about new ways to expand and increase access.
That's great to hear. Well, let me ask you one more question, Dina. I mean, we're looking out at this room of folks. We've got, I think hundreds more tuned into the live stream. Many of these folks are your partners in all of this work. They're affordable housing developers. They're run nonprofits. They're working, on the ground in communities to help stabilize, homeowners that are facing some of these challenges. All of the above. We've got philanthropy in the room. We've got folks from the state legislature, from the governor's office. So I want to ask you a little bit about what does everybody else need to do? HPD's busy. You're doing a lot. We want you to be busy.
I don't want to tell.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit about, whether it's, because you have this experience at the state level, whether it's some partnership that you'd like to see expand or grow, or things that you'd like to see the state do to support the city's goals, or things that you'd like to see philanthropy do to reach out a hand and say, hey, this is a way that the philanthropic community in New York can help advance some of these goals, or folks in the private sector. We've got folks in the room that are doing, market development, in New York City. Where else would you like to see those other partners step up and play a role?
Yeah, I don't know that the right way to frame it is where else, because as you say, right, our work is made possible through this network of external partners, right? We don't build the housing, we don't own the housing. All of our work, we don't give out the grants. We do that through a network of really dedicated, responsible nonprofits, for-profits, social services organizations. So, I think New York is very lucky. I've actually experienced doing housing outside of the state of New York in a place like Texas, right, where there's just no capacity comparable to what we have here in New York City. So I am always very grateful for just the incredible dedication of the nonprofit and the for-profit sector dedicated to affordable housing in New York City. I think where I would say maybe we need to do better with each other is folks need to see HPD as a place where they can come to tell us, right, what is working, what is not working, what do you need that we're not doing, what problem do you see that we're not addressing. I think a lot of that kind of comes out, unfortunately, vitriolically in the press, right? And really people don't know that the door is open. We want to hear from our partners. We want to hear what you're frustrated by or what you think we need to be doing better. And also you need to hear it, right? So if there's something we think isn't functioning properly, like I mentioned, the Home Fix program, we need to be able to problem solve that together. I do think that is something that this whole administration is really dedicated to, which is to say, we are partners and we need to be rowing in the same direction. And where that's falling short, we need to be able to have that conversation in a real honest way. And I will just say, speaking for myself, we are wide open, right? Come tell us what you think we need to be doing differently and where we need to collaborate. I will say one place we need to be functioning differently is we need to pay our nonprofits on time and more quickly. And we are working on it.
Well, with all of that on your plate, you just added getting nonprofits paid on time to the agenda.
Top of the agenda.
Noted. We want to let you go get back to all the great work that you're doing. Dina, thank you so much for spending time with us, for the great work you do for the city. It's really a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
You've got to open that.
Could I invite our group of panelists to join me on the stage for our second panel? I'm just going to slide right down. And if Maria and David and Molly could come join me, we will get right into it. Hey, Molly. Great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today. Grab a seat. I think I got you right next to me. Come on over. Mr. Jones, good to see you. Thank you for being here. Hey, Maria, great to see you. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm good. Thank you. Come on in. You got your name on a seat.
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
Pleasure.
All right, welcome everyone. So we're just going to hop right back into it. And if folks want to come up and grab seats in the front, you're welcome to it. I am still Eli Dvorkin, but I'm going to introduce who's joined me on the stage for our final panel today. I cannot give you their full bios or we won't have time for the conversation. You can read about them in your packets, but I'll just mention very briefly, we are joined today by Molly Wasow Park, who is the CEO of the New York City Housing Partnership and the former commissioner of the New York City Department of Social Services. Welcome, Molly. Great to have you. We're joined also by Maria Torres-Springer, the president of the Charles H. Revson Foundation and former first deputy mayor of New York City, among many other roles in public service. Welcome, Maria. Great to have you. And also by David Jones, the president and CEO of the Community Service Society. Welcome to the three of you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
No, it's a pleasure.
Yes, I think a round of applause is warranted. For collectively the many, many decades of public service represented on this panel. So thank you all truly for the work that you do. So we want to hop into a conversation today that will deepen and I think take this morning's conversation in a new direction. We've heard a lot already today about what it would take to leverage our housing policy as a city to advance economic mobility through home ownership, through opportunities for wealth preservation and asset protection, so many different dimensions of this challenge and this opportunity as a city. But we want to open up a different conversation, one that I think expands the ideas of how to leverage our housing policy in a new way, and that is around opening doors to opportunity-rich neighborhoods. When I think about this particular topic, look, it's no surprise that opportunity is unevenly distributed across New York City. But as a couple of my colleagues have alluded to earlier, research from Raj Chetty and others on his team suggests that where families live does have a powerful effect on long-term economic mobility. Maybe not for the adult in that household today, but absolutely for their children in the future. So if we take that seriously, that not only do we have this uneven landscape of opportunity in New York, but that where you live can have a profound impact on the trajectory of your children in the future, what should that mean in practice for New York City's housing policy to open more doors to opportunity? And maybe Molly, just because you're right next to me, I'll start with you, and we can go from there.
Sure. I think the obvious answer is you can build housing in neighborhoods that are already meet whatever your definition of high opportunity is, and that's a whole other conversation, but let's sort of assume for the moment that we've defined what that looks like. You can build there. Tends to be more expensive, so there is a trade-off between the how much and the where, but that kind of fair housing policy is really important and has been for the city, going back to at least since Maria was commissioner at HPD. I think there's a real piece around investing in neighborhoods that don't meet the metrics of high opportunity. How do we make more of those neighborhoods achieve those goals that we want, right? So whether it's investing in schools and parks and libraries and other kinds of things. I think particularly in a place like New York City, transit is a huge piece of this because very few of us, spend all of our time in a given neighborhood, right? We all get on the subway and go to different places. And, we're talking about young people, even in New York, schools are much less geography based than they are in other parts of the country. So transit matters. And then, the research that's been done elsewhere is very much dependent on vouchers, and New York City has a much more complex voucher landscape than exists elsewhere because we do have a really robust city-funded voucher program. Vouchers are a piece of it, I think, and they continue to be a piece of it. I will acknowledge they aren't going to be the be-all and end-all, both because of supply constraints. So with City FEPS, the city-funded voucher program, for example, at any given point in time, there's between 11 and 13,000 households in the shelter system with a voucher who are looking for a place to use it. So if we don't solve supply, we're not going to, vouchers are only going to go so far. But also because people really depend on their social capital networks, and those tend to be in the neighborhoods where they already are. And so people don't necessarily want to go to another place because social capital really, really matters.
My turn?
Oh, well,
okay,
you're welcome to jump in.
No. So I agree always. This has been my I think my mantra for 20 years. I agree with everything that Molly Park ever has to say. But more generally as well, to just take a different lens on it, I think we unlock more doors to opportunity through our housing policy if we think anew, differently, maybe more ambitiously about the goals of our housing policy. And for a very long time, and it continues to this day, of course, we judge our housing policy by how many units we create or preserve, how affordable those units are, how many shelter exits. And don't get me wrong, that work, we did it. It's incredibly hard already. But to unlock the type of opportunity in high opportunity neighborhoods and elsewhere, it also requires us to think of our housing policy as perhaps answering a different set of questions. Whether families, children actually move to places with better schools, whether the access to transit, to jobs, to childcare, to what we've called amenities, but are important components of any neighborhood social infrastructure, whether that is actually there. And I don't think that the work of defining opportunity is easy. I think it's easy to traffic in that language, but to really name all of those aspects from childcare to transit to jobs and then connect them very intentionally to our housing policy is a different orientation. I don't think it's impossible, but it would be a real acknowledgement, and I think a good one, that that housing is not just about where you lay your head at night, that it is, of course, and has to be about allowing families and children to access the type of supports that are critical so that when we try to judge whether we're successful or not in our housing policy, it's all of the metrics of typical housing plans, but it's also asking ourselves 2-3 years later, are those families actually better off? And are we seeing income growth and better attachment to those services? I don't think we do that in this city in a comprehensive enough fashion, but it isn't just a matter of measurement. It really does become a matter of reorienting what we think a housing plan or a set of housing policies needs to achieve in our city.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'll echo some of the things said here. The notion of moving people out of many neighborhoods is not necessarily the right way to go, because networks of community, of church, of family really mean that most individuals living in poor neighborhoods have a whole network they're depending upon. Moreover, and this goes back historically, my father founded, Thomas Jones founded Bed-Stuy Restoration with Robert Kennedy. And one of the things that didn't work, they tried to create a IBM factory for cable there. But actually, I think Maria talked about it. It was more people were using the transportation infrastructure to get to jobs. Where they lived and where they worked were connected because of the enormous systems we have in the MTA and the rest, which in some ways are unique in the country. And strengthening those transportation systems may be a critical point of getting people access. But I don't think it's simple to move people out. There's also a political ramification for this. The city is going through an enormous transformation in terms of ethnic groups. As has been mentioned, the African American community is contracting, but the Asian and Latino community is growing. When African Americans were concentrated, it led to a political explosion that had enormous impacts in terms of changing the city, changing the attitudes in the city. It led to Shirley Chisholm. It led to a host of other impacts, Charlie Rangel, the rest. Now that's shifting. And if I start to break up neighborhoods and, oh, you're going to move over to wherever, the political power may not follow where it should. And that has an enormous other layer here that we have to recognize, that it's not just housing we're talking about, it's the nature of community and new communities that are emerging that want to express themselves politically in the city of New York.
Well, you've set the table, David, I think, for a really interesting conversation. I want to unpack more of those pieces. I want to get to these ideas around how do we open doors to where opportunity is greater, as well as how do we create more opportunity where folks live today. And I want to ask about how we leverage the tools that we have. So Molly, maybe I'll start there. One of those tools, and it pertains to both housing stability and also, I think, opportunity, are voucher programs, federally funded, state dollars and obviously city money as well. There are over 120,000 New Yorkers receiving Section 8 vouchers. There are nearly 70,000 New Yorkers now receiving vouchers through City FEPS. The City Council's expanded that program this year. So I wanted to ask you about if we want to take what is now a significant both city dollar expense in terms of City FEPS, and obviously one of the all too rare investments from the federal government that are helping to support low-income New Yorkers today, and ensure that those vouchers are not just leading folks into housing, but are leading New Yorkers into opportunities for greater economic mobility. Mm-hmm. What should we be doing? How do we think about those voucher programs today? And how should we think about them if we want them to help us also achieve some goals around economic mobility too?
Yep. Great question. So I think echoing some of the statements that were made on the first panel, housing stability in and of itself is a foundation for economic mobility. And we know that with a household that moves out of the shelter system and into subsidized housing, which typically means moving out with a voucher these days, rates of return to shelter are very, very low, about 1% for a family, for example. And that in and of itself is the foundation for economic mobility. There's enormous amounts of research that shows that impacts of particularly early childhood housing instability has on that child over their lifetime. So the fact that we are investing city dollars to stabilize those families anywhere, I think, is an investment in generational economic mobility. I think vouchers, the other way that sort of vouchers just intrinsically play a value in that economic mobility is that they do recalibrate and reset as a household's income changes. And so you do have, people are paying 30% of their income, no matter what that is. As much as I am an incredible believer in the development of the affordable housing, and we absolutely need that supply. But if you were in a LIHTC building and your income goes down for whatever reason, your rent share doesn't reset, right? And so there's actually a lot of data that people in affordable housing are rent burdened nationally. The number, and this is actually a few years old, is that about 40% of people living in tax credit buildings are rent burdened. So the voucher plays a role in sort of making sure that people have, a proportional share of their income for other expenses, no matter what is going on in their life. City FEPS has not been traditionally treated as an economic mobility program, right? Outside of the aspects that I just talked about that it's sort of fundamental to, housing stability is fundamental to economic mobility. I do think that there's some ways that we could make that a bit more of the program if that is the direction that the city opted to go. Since probably 3 years ago, City FEPs can be used anywhere in New York State. Very few people have taken advantage of that. There's a few reasons for that. I think a big piece of it is, as David was talking about, sort of people's connection to neighborhood and the local social capital. That really matters. When I was at DSS, we were also sort of when we launched the statewide City FEPs, we went with a fairly soft promotion of that because some of the outside of New York City communities weren't super receptive. But this is a way that, to the extent that people want to move elsewhere in the state, that is a tool. Something else that we did while I was at DSS was that we project-based City FEPs, so it could actually be used for development. And I think that provides an opportunity to create housing that is dedicated for people coming out of the shelter system in a variety of different neighborhoods. So that's a tool that the city could lean into. Formally linking City FEPs to workforce development is a really dicey concept, and particularly in this climate where work requirements are getting attached to all kinds of benefits. So I think it is not impossible to say that you could fold a workforce development component into City FEPs, but I think you really need to do it in such a way that you aren't structuring it in a way that is punitive and that is actually jeopardizing people's housing stability in a way that, frankly, I personally believe that the work requirements that are now being attached to SNAP and to Medicaid are going to make people worse off rather than better off.
Just on the topic of vouchers, it's they're obviously administered by different agencies, and so each one has its own set of rules or supports, different types of populations. And precisely because the attachment to a home is foundational to everything that we're talking about, the base measure of whether they're getting those programs are being administered properly is, did someone rent a unit? And the transformation that Molly is describing here, that is a potential of thinking about it as an economic mobility platform, I think it's really intriguing. There are a couple of ways that we could push on thinking about, well, what does that mean in practice, and then a caveat that I wanted to give in the end. What it would mean if we were really thinking about what are the high opportunity neighborhoods, or all of the supports that are there for some of the programs, many families, but probably not widely enough or consistent enough, is the help to actually move to specific high opportunity neighborhoods, recruiting landlords specifically in those neighborhoods, the type of coaching and counseling, the deposit support. There's a long list of things if you really wanted to make sure that connection to quote unquote high opportunity neighborhoods was there. But then you also think about life after the lease is signed. And so the post-move set of supports, the attachment to workforce training opportunities, to childcare opportunities, to all of the other networks and what exists in a neighborhood, that category of supports, not in all of the programs, and is, I think, a really interesting thing potentially to build out. There are already some programs, HPD, right, for its Section 8 vouchers has a family self-sufficiency program. It's a demonstration, it's a pilot, and it provides workforce training and financial literacy support to certain families. And as their earnings grow, there is a match in terms of savings so that it is the type of, the incentives are aligned, but that doesn't reach everyone. And for every good idea that is a pilot, getting to scale can become quite tricky. So those are, thinking about what the attachment to high opportunity neighborhoods needs to look like, the post-move set of supports. But here's the caveat that I wanted to mention. Whether it's City FEPs or the other voucher programs, right now they are asked to do, each of these programs, so much. Their goals are to reduce the shelter population, to reduce rent burden. If you add, which is a very laudable, it's what this conversation is about, economic mobility, we always have to be conscientious of, can it really optimize for all of those things? And how much is that going to cost? And is that the right use of the public dollar? Or how do we involve all of the other systems that are critical to thinking about economic mobility? Because no program, City FEPs or otherwise, can solve them all at the same time. And when we expect too much without the resourcing or the alignment of different agencies, then they'll never meet their aspirations. And that typically becomes the pattern of well-intentioned programs that are trying to solve too many system issues, in my experience.
Just a couple of comments on this issue. So we've done reports on the issue of how people are responding to rent control, City FEPs, and there's strong evidence that people get real help out of these programs and staying in place. So that's one. But another sort of counter is that City FEPs and voucher programs are often not accepted, despite legal requirements that they be. So enforcement of these kinds of programs is going to be a significant part of what we're doing here. So against this background, I guess I'm bringing it out of housing to my critical worry about a generation of young people growing up in many of these neighborhoods. We have, I think, reached the highest dropout rate virtually in known memory at a time where the requirements of entering the workforce have escalated. So this notion that these neighborhoods are dysfunctional is in some respect a problem of a younger generation coming up with no prospects for engaging in serious and productive work. So I'm less worried about people my age, or even who have established themselves in where I grew up in Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy, as opposed to what's going to happen to the generation that is following, and merely moving those young people around like shuttlecocks is not necessarily going to resolve some of the critical issues that have begun to impact every news story you see in the Daily News and the Post. So again, this is not housing policy, but recognizing how widespread the problem we're confronting here. And if we don't grab that by job opportunity, which we've talked about, which hasn't been particularly effective, Section 3 in public housing has never really been enforced. I think I remember a panel we were on with Mayor Bloomberg where we were trying to get the construction unions to open their doors somewhat, which basically I felt shut down immediately. We didn't get anywhere despite the leverage we had. But we're going to have to break open some of these opportunities that may be available to a younger generation involved in reconstruction and helping NYCHA residents, particularly the young, get an advancement in those areas. Again, this has to be a broader palette than just focusing exclusively on housing.
Well, let me build on that a little bit, David, because I think part of what our thinking was, as an organization, Center for Urban Future, we're not a housing organization. We are really an economic mobility focused organization. But that's exactly why we wanted to convene this conversation today to say, hey, let's make sure that we're leveraging our housing policy, which includes billions of dollars, both in terms of subsidy and in terms of investment, to be able to move the needle on economic mobility. So I actually want to ask, I kind of want to take your point, David, but turn it around as a question for all three of you, which is, When you think about the other ways that we could be leveraging our housing policy to actually address some of those challenges, you mentioned, for folks playing along at home, Section 3, you're talking about contracting opportunities within NYCHA, right? We're talking about billions of dollars that we spend to build and preserve affordable housing in New York City. But how much of that money is also flowing to immigrant and minority-owned small businesses in New York City? I've been thinking about leveraging housing to help folks move to places where the opportunities are a little bit greater, but also the investments in housing that can help create more economically mobile neighborhoods in neighborhoods that are currently low income today. So I wanted to ask all of you in a few minutes or so, and we will also turn it over to our audience as part of this panel. But when you think about all these opportunities, I do want to, David, keep the focus on housing, but open up to those challenges that you mentioned, whether it's out of school and out of work young adults, whether it's opportunities to develop more of our great immigrant and minority-owned small businesses in New York to help them grow and hire and have more of their own economic impact, whether it's through moving to opportunity or creating more higher opportunity neighborhoods in a place-based way. Where else do you see those opportunities? I guess I'm looking for specific ideas that you would like to see, the folks in this room tuning in, folks in City Hall today, in state government today, looking for specific ideas that might help to kind of bridge that disconnect between our housing policy and our goals of reducing poverty. What are some of your other ideas that we should be pursuing?
Getting to that, I think we did a poll. I had always been raised, there was something called a talented 10th, that the only way for African Americans to progress was college, the rest. And it was almost to the point where the notion of career and technical education was considered anathema. We did a poll. We have something called the Unheard Third, now it's named, and started to ask people what they thought of educational opportunities which involve career and technical. Overwhelmingly, and much to my shock, 80 to 90% of low-income people thought this was an interesting idea, that they'd like to see their kids get some skills that could be immediately useful and allow them to have themselves and their families move up economically. Career and technical has always been a dead letter. It's gotten some energy, but it's never really been accepted by many in my own community and elsewhere. But what we were finding in the poll, that uniquely people were starting to talk about this seriously. This is also the discussion of can people actually make a decent living when they go to college and get a psychology degree? I don't know, but I know that if you can become, I talk to, all over the place about this.
College student making me anxious.
Yeah, I know, sorry about that. But I'm interested if it's time that we start to look at the openings that are available, the 90 billion or whatever in unmet needs in public housing, in reconstruction and capital needs. Maybe we could get some movement here in terms of re-engaging a whole generation that has dropped out, sees no connection to what's happening in their schools, to something that can lead to serious economic opportunity. So it goes against my history, but it's starting to be something that, particularly as we started to poll new immigrant communities, they have no difficulty with. They aren't under this sort of, the only way up is if you become a doctor, a lawyer, or the rest. There are other areas here which lead to significant economic growth and stability, and it is directly related if we can get the housing system actively moving on this thing.
Can I offer a few specific ideas?
Yes,
so I think if the mission is that we have to make sure that people aren't forced to leave the neighborhoods where they have the networks and the connections, and yet we also want to make sure that zip codes don't determine people's future life outcomes. I think there's some specific ways, and maybe some of these are very kind of technocratic, but just from the point of view of what does it mean to actually put this in practice, every administration since I can remember has a housing plan. And every administration adds chapters, resequences the chapters to show, demonstrate, and then manage against that, right? What their priorities are. If the next housing plan or addendum to this one has a chapter that's not just, right now, I'm forgetting exactly, it's a 112-page document, it's beautiful, but it has your typical chapters. It should, what if it had a chapter that was really as rigorous and in-depth as it needed to be, specifically on economic mobility or specifically on workforce? The thing, it becomes a forcing mechanism, so when you are developing your goals and your programs and getting the money, the resources that you need, and aligning the agencies, it's not just a typical housing agencies, it brings in the economic development agencies, the educational institutions, so you have a chapter that is real and achievable, that the public sees, and you're held accountable to that. The second thing that I would do is really think about whether it's in a rezoning area, and having, with Molly and many others, negotiated a number of these, the investments that are negotiated with the city council on, let's say, hard infrastructure, that I think we're pretty good at as a city. Parks, sewers, I'm not saying it isn't hard, but it's always struck me that there's a real opportunity to have a better package, a better set of investments on mobility, on workforce in those areas where we are building residential capacity because of a rezoning. And that it's not an outgrowth of the EIS, it's just part of what we should be thinking about in terms of complete neighborhoods. And in those places where there might not be, there isn't a rezoning, or there was one previously, but you're not really seeing the opportunity that we would all like, basically kind of defining what that looks like. I mean, we have so many indices of maybe health and neighborhood vitality, but if we really thought about what does an opportunity look like in a neighborhood, and it can't just be about crime statistics or housing starts or vacancies, it's all of the things that we really want and need in terms of educational attainment, in terms of access to jobs, the commute to jobs, and understood what that baseline was, and see if neighborhoods are actually moving. So that encompasses not, what it ensures is that we're not accepting that neighborhoods will permanently be low opportunity, because that's just accepting decline, and the trends that, as David has described, have led to the type of stagnation of opportunity for too many families. And then finally, sorry, I think it's actually pretty rare. This convening is a good one, but I think it's rare, in having overseen a portfolio that had economic development and housing, like housers and economic developers kind of coming together. It doesn't happen often enough. I'm not saying it's unprecedented, but the work of then saying, how do we, given all of the levers we pull, start coming up with new approaches, or the synergies that are necessary? I think both programmatically and from an advocacy perspective, I think that would make a real dent in how we think about what a housing policy can be in our city.
Yeah. So few things to add to the list, and I think the first one is a perfect segue with what Maria just had to say. We've recognized for a long time that when we spend, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars on affordable housing, that is an opportunity to invest in communities. I think the concept exists, the implementation has been pretty abominable. Like, we put in a local hiring requirement and then sort of, and that is because we have the housers, we have the economic development people, and then there's also sort of a third group of the social service people who are actually, know who in the community wants one of these jobs and needs the training, and if they had the training, and could also, by the way, buy the boots and the toolkit and maybe help with the apprentice program, then is going to get the person into the job, right? So we need to build that sort of both the operational infrastructure that gets from the finding the people, doing the training, solving the logistics, and then getting them into the job. And that we haven't done that well in the past. And when we have done it well, it's been at a very small scale. I think we need to recognize, and many people do recognize, right, we actually have a lot of affordable housing in high opportunity areas because they weren't necessarily high opportunity areas when the housing was built, right? The Lower East Side, even 40 years ago, that was the Upper West Side, a high opportunity area, right? But there is housing in a lot of these large swaths of Brooklyn, right? Places where it was built, and we need to hang on to that. The affordable housing stock in the city right now is really struggling because expenses have gone up faster than rents have gone up faster than tenant incomes. I think the city is recognizing this and is building some, rolling out some tools to help the housing. We also need to think about the people who live in that housing already. Collections are a huge issue. In affordable housing, people aren't paying their rent. Are not paying their rent because they're bad people. They're not paying their rent because everything is too expensive and they don't have the money to pay their rent. So how do we support the people who already live in affordable housing? I am day 3 as the president and CEO of New York City Housing Partnership, but this is on my agenda. And then my last idea that I would throw out, and this is a much more pie in the sky, but our tools, all of our housing tools, vouchers, leases and affordable housing are all really structured around the idea of that you have one nuclear family living in one apartment with one lease and one, maybe one subsidy. And that's not actually how people function, right? I'm not advocating for overcrowded, but there's a lot of varieties of shared housing that people use to get by, and they use to get by from an economic perspective, but they also use to get by from a social capital perspective, right? And if there was a way, and I did put some effort into this, my social service days, COVID kind of took over and it didn't make it get forward, but to be able to say, like, you know what, these are two single parents who want to move into a unit together and they each have a voucher, and if you add them together, you could get something in a very different kind of a neighborhood, and they could provide supports to one another in addition to adding the rent money together. If we can adapt some of our tools so that we can get beyond this sort of narrow nuclear family, I think there could be some value there.
Well, I love these ideas. I want to thank you all for sharing them. I also want to see if our audience has some ideas too. So if you'll allow me, let's turn it over to our audience for just a few minutes. My colleagues have microphones, so they'll come around. If you just put your hand up, we'll get to you. Please we'd love to hear your questions for our panelists. We'd love to hear your ideas for leveraging housing policy to unlock economic mobility. Just try to keep your comments to just a minute or less so we can get to as many as possible. Get your hands up high in the air. My colleagues will come around, and we'd love to hear from all of you. I can't believe in a room of 200 plus people. Throw your hands up, don't be shy. I will ask more questions of our panelists, but I already see some hands starting to go up. Great.
A microphone? I don't know if this is working.
Yep, you're good.
There it is. Okay. Thank you for your thoughts and your brilliant experience. And I'm just wondering if we can talk a little bit about workforce housing. And I'm thinking of, hospitals in outer boroughs often have a lot of land, and they could build affordable housing for the community, but also specifically for their nurses and their security guards and their non-doctors who make the hospitals function, but are living in Connecticut, New Jersey, because they can't afford to live here. Or police precincts. I'm thinking of one in Queens near the Flushing Airport. There's a lot of land. Why can't we build some housing for the whole community, but also specifically for our cops? When we're looking at the 2nd Avenue subway and there's eminent domain, is there any way we can have housing specifically for some of our MTA workers who, might be too rich for the affordable housing, but too poor for the market rate? I'm eager for your thoughts on that kind of housing.
Well, I think it's a great idea. It has been suggested, particularly around some of the, downstate looked at it, Kings County looked at it, and I think it is an important idea. The cost of living and housing for nurses and other hospital people is it doesn't exist, and you could make things. I think already there's discussion at the MTA about the issue of the Second Avenue subway and what kind of opportunities that's going to lead. And I never get this straight. There's something called value capture. The notion that if you're bringing new lines, and I think this is also the light rail system that's being talked about, Queens and Brooklyn, that there should be some recovery by the city from the owners whose property suddenly zoomed through the roof because of these new capital expenditures. So I think it is the right way to go, both in terms of housing people in affordable places that support the whole infrastructure of the city. I think it's a good idea.
And one of the things that I have been thinking about in my spare time, because that's the kind of nerd that I am, is that, the co-ops that were built in, 70 to 100 years ago by various unions, right? The amalgamated co-ops in the Bronx, the garment worker co-ops that on sort of the far end of Grand Street by the FDR, at least some of which have gone market rate in that period of time. But these were like literal, they sort of go to the original meaning of co-op in that like the development costs were put up by the people who are going to be buying into them, and that you were, and they were financed with very limited government subsidy, some amount of land, at least on the Grand Street co-ops, and tax benefits, but they didn't have the same kind of capital subsidy or LIHTC or anything like that we put into housing, affordable housing now. And I think, looking at whether or not there's things that we can learn from that model and versions of that is, that is targeted as workforce housing, that allows people to build equity, tying into some of the last panel. I think that is an idea that is worth dusting off.
The only thing that I'll add is just making the distinction between workforce housing, small cap W, small cap H, and then large cap W, and are those the letters, and H? Because if the question is, should we involve our larger institutions, should they be in the business of housing, like hospitals, et cetera? The answer is yes. If the question is, should pension funds associated with labor, it's actually already happening, maybe not at the scale, but there were a couple of really interesting projects that were at least in the pipeline when I was still in the administration. The answer is yes. Does overall the work that many were part of being able to build housing in every neighborhood through City of Yes and otherwise and upping, does that help the overall workforce? 100%. It obviously gets tricky when you start getting into the models of it can only be for this type of workforce because of issues of disparate impact. And we confronted so many versions of that in thinking about what preference looks like. There is already a municipal preference in our housing lottery system. But those set of legal constraints should not prevent us from thinking as aspirationally as we should about who are the partners from a financing perspective, from a land perspective, who can help build the type of housing across the city at the scale that is needed for a wider swath of New Yorkers.
That's great. I would just add two other quick ideas from Cuff's own research. One is we have over 80 acres of surface parking in our CUNY system. There could be some housing there. And two, we've got dozens of New York City public library, Brooklyn, Queens, and NYPL branch libraries that are either under 10,000 square feet or face millions of dollars of unmet state of good repair capital needs, or both. And many more of those branches could be rebuilt into brand new, modernized, expanded branch libraries with a whole bunch of housing on top. So just two other possibilities there. Love to see some more hands go up. My colleagues are coming around, and we'll get to as many of you as we can.
Hi, thank you so much for this conversation. My question is about small businesses in the neighborhoods. They really bring vibrancy to life in the neighborhoods, and they increase the quality of living for small businesses, particularly storefronts. And we have about the same storefront vacancy that we had in Manhattan and all the boroughs as before COVID. But how do storefronts play into increasing the value of a neighborhood and making a neighborhood more livable? Because often my experience has been, especially with commercial leases in Manhattan, that the tax increases are not passed on to the rent control departments above in a mixed-use building, but onto the small businesses on the storefront. And the same thing with the corporate rent tax. So is there any opportunities for ownership, perhaps through the SBA 504, for co-ops and stuff to purchase and own the, live and work in spaces?
That's like a whole other panel. I'm being facetious. Of course, like a lot of the literature shows that, to the extent that New Yorkers, they may not trust like government or big institutions, but there's an enormous amount of trust in their local small businesses. Mm-hmm. And all of the constraints that you mentioned continue to be real. There's a whole set of small business policy that needs to be looked at and refreshed for the way, all of the convulsions in how in retail and in consumer spending, all of that. But to bring it back to the nexus with housing, a few levers do exist. Again, when we do rezonings, thinking about what are the ways zoning can either prevent or facilitate the types of local small businesses being in new developments. In RFPs for public land, thinking about, well, what makes this a good project? In addition to the type of quality, affordable housing, income levels, but always we've looked at the types of programming that will be on the ground floor, community centers, et cetera. That's an opportunity to use that tool, again, to prioritize. I think that there too, in rezonings or in projects, it's not just, do you have the zoning, do you have the partnerships, but what does it look like to make the connections with existing entrepreneurs, with local anchors, and a lot of that might be working with local merchants associations, community-based organizations. That's there, but how do you both prioritize it, and how do you resource that type of work? So what I would focus on, not to just name all of the tools, is it's the same thing with jobs. For your housing policy, you think about the programs, where the dollars are, where the levers are of negotiation, and those are, in my opinion, the places where you can force, incentivize, and then hopefully achieve the types of connections to job training, to small business services and development, and all of the other priorities that you might have, childcare and transportation, that are critical to this larger equation of economic mobility.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you, Maria. Some other hands. I think we've got time maybe for one more. Microphones are coming around up at the top as well.
Thank you so much for this event. As a Bronx resident and a homeowner in the Bronx, I feel that a real way for the city of New York to open the door to opportunities for homeowners, landlords, co-op owners, and everybody basically is to eliminate the cost of water on New York City homeowners and taxpayers, because it's unfair that every summer for 2 months all the hydrants within all the neighborhoods are opened up and water runs for free, and that has a value on it that homeowners and landlords have to pay for. And it's unfair to all New Yorkers that some people get free water in the summer while others are burdened with a meter system in their property, and they have to pay for that. And I think this would be something that would help eliminate a lot of financial problems for small homeowners like myself, who only owns a single family home. And I watch gallons and gallons of water being robbed because there's a price on it. That's my opinion. I don't know if that's a question or whatever, or something that maybe can be looked into. But I think that would help the landlords too. And thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thank you. We can take maybe one more idea or question from the audience. Just make sure your hands are up so folks, my team can see you.
Is it me? So currently there are millions of square feet of underutilized commercial and institutional buildings throughout the city. Outside of city, yes. How could the city introduce a new program to unlock those assets to become a meaningful part of the housing crisis?
Did you say underutilized commercial?
Yes.
It's like 135 million square feet, right?
Yes. Vacant commercial.
Right, yep. And one piece of that, which is over the last few years, was unlocked through hard-fought wins in terms of state legislation and local land use, are of course the conversion of underutilized commercial space into residential. Recent headlines about construction problems notwithstanding.
We'll keep that to the side.
Yeah, but it's actually it'll be interesting. We spent so much time, blood, sweat, and tears, finding ways to make the process of building and of converting, right, from commercial to residential, given the 135 million square feet of underutilized commercial, into residential. We have a housing crisis. And of course, something very unfortunate and knock on, wherever there's wood, won't result in any physical harm happens. And what I hope does not happen then is that we then layer on 100 new regulations in response to that, while well-intentioned, that takes us many steps backwards. And there are already a number of properties that are well on that path because of changes to state legislation and a tax incentive. So that is one route. And whether it's that or most of City of Yes that enables that type of thing, the real focus on implementation is critical, which can include but not limited to ensuring construction safety, of course. But that's a big piece of it, and it's well underway, and the accountability that is necessary from the public, from stakeholders, to make sure that those programs and all of those new tools actually get implemented is also something we rarely talk about, because it's not that exciting. But if we don't ensure the implementation of those tools, then the next time that we have to work with communities and legislators to say we need more, it becomes that much harder because those promises will not have been kept, in my opinion.
Sorry, could I just clarify? Outside of City of Yes and everything that's converting right now, kind of focusing on Class B and C commercial office buildings that may not qualify for City Yes, or it's too much of a capital expenditure for the current landlord to convert the building.
I'm so sorry to do this. It's a great question. You may have to take your answer offline because we are truly out of time. But I just want to thank you all. If you could all join me in a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much. Maria, I'm sure you can talk about Class B and C office buildings for a whole other hour, but truly thank you all. I really appreciate your thoughts and your time.
Thank you.
Molly?
Thank you.
But don't go anywhere. We're going to move directly into the final couple portions of our event today. Maria, thank you so much. You always give me at least 5 ideas for new Cuff reports when you're on a panel, so grateful. David, thank you so much. Pleasure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. If you will just bear with me for 2 more minutes, I would love to share one more idea from the Center for an Urban Future for leveraging our housing policy for economic mobility. Look, this morning has made a few things clear, but one of them is that stable housing is an essential foundation for economic mobility. And that is why, as that last panel surfaced, Citi FEPS has become one of New York City's most important anti-poverty investments. This voucher program now serves nearly 68,000 households in New York City and has helped more than 123,000 low-income New Yorkers secure permanent housing. And it works. Families that leave shelter with rental assistance are far less likely to return than those who leave without a subsidy. But qualifying for a voucher and then using it to secure a home remains a fragmented, confusing, and painfully slow process. New Yorkers already facing enormous challenges must navigate multiple agencies, portals, inspections, recertifications, and document requests. Even a small error can lead to weeks or months of delay. Now, city leaders have begun advancing some reforms to make Citi FEPS faster and more predictable, and following through on those improvements is step one. But even streamlining the bureaucracy will not be enough to turn a housing program into an economic mobility engine. The key is a major expansion of hands-on housing navigation. The nonprofit Anthos Home offers a promising model. Its navigators work hand in hand with families and property owners, coordinate paperwork and inspections, solve problems that could derail a placement, and provide support long after move-in. And Anthos Home has moved hundreds of households into permanent housing and helped them remain there. It's a model that deserves to expand. And the city's ambition shouldn't end with a voucher or even a new set of apartment keys. Going forward, housing navigation should also help families reach neighborhoods with stronger schools, better access to childcare and jobs, more manageable commutes, connect them to CUNY, to workforce development programs and other opportunities to get ahead, and ultimately greater long-term economic mobility. And Seattle is already showing what that could look like. Its Creating Moves to Opportunity program pairs families receiving housing vouchers with hands-on search assistance, landlord outreach, and flexible financial support, helping them secure homes in neighborhoods where lower-income children have historically experienced far greater upward economic mobility. The program draws on research that has mapped the geography of opportunity across America by census tract, including right here in New York City, and we can use those tools today. And this research underscores exactly what's at stake. Children who moved to even slightly higher opportunity neighborhoods at a young age were far more likely to attend college and earned more as adults, helping to break generational cycles of poverty. For working-age adults, navigators should also connect families to education, training, childcare, transportation, and other supports that can help with economic security now, building on a modest but important new investment in connecting Citi FEPS recipients to workforce development that's in this year's city budget. And so Citi FEPS is already a powerful homelessness prevention tool. The next step is to make it a stronger catalyst for economic mobility, helping New Yorkers secure housing faster, access higher opportunity neighborhoods, and build better futures for themselves and their children. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Arvalo. I'm the Chief of Staff here at the Center for an Urban Future, and I have the final idea pitch for you today before we move on to 2 more exciting fireside chats. I probably don't need to tell you that artificial intelligence is the most disruptive technology to hit New York City's economy in generations. AI is already creating new kinds of work and driving demand for new skills, but there are strong indications that it is also beginning to automate and transform major areas of work. Fortunately, I have it on good authority that chiefs of staff at Center for an Urban Future are not going anywhere, but there are real warning signs across our economy. Research from the Center for an Urban Future finds that entry-level job postings in New York City have plummeted 37% since 2022, with occupations most exposed to generative AI facing the steepest declines. Mid-career workers could face significant disruption too, as AI changes the way employers work and hire. New York City cannot wait for the federal government, international agreements, or the market alone to determine how workers are supported through this transition. That is why city leaders should launch the nation's first AI workforce preparation fund and pair it with a high-level, citywide citywide AI workforce task force. The city should seed the fund with public dollars, then use that commitment to unlock larger investments from philanthropy, employers, and AI companies. For early career workers, the fund could support AI skills training, paid hands-on learning, and fellowships with nonprofits, small businesses, or public agencies that need help using AI effectively. For incumbent workers, it could help employers train staff to use AI tools, take on higher value tasks, and stay employed as jobs change. For displaced workers, it should create a rapid response system with career coaching, retraining, job placement, benefit navigation, and other stabilizing supports. The task force would be responsible for bringing together employers, AI companies, CUNY, nonprofit training providers, labor, and workforce agencies, and within 6 months, it should produce a concrete AI workforce preparation plan, including an early warning system for AI-related labor market disruption. AI is going to reshape work. The question is whether New York City helps workers adapt, advance, and transition, or leaves them to fend for themselves through one of the largest labor market disruptions in decades. An AI workforce preparation fund can harness the city's workforce development ecosystem to help our workers and our economy adapt to change. To read more about this idea and all of the others that you heard this morning, you can go to the QR code on your agenda or check it out on nycfuture.org. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our second fireside chat of the morning. If you could please join me in welcoming CUNY Chancellor Félix Matos Rodríguez and CUF Executive Director Jonathan Bowles.
Thank you. By the way, can I get a big, big round of applause for my amazing staff, Stephanie, Eli, Ale, and everybody else at the Center for an Urban Future. They are so amazing. So thank you to all the CUF staff. So I don't know that I have to introduce my our next guest, CUNY Chancellor Félix Matos Rodríguez, but I do want to say that if you follow.
Thank you for that applause. I'll take it.
If you follow the work of the Center for an Urban Future, you probably know that we write about CUNY a whole lot. I think you probably heard CUNY come up in 4 of our 5 idea pitches today. We do so because CUNY is the city's most important economic mobility institution. Especially in today's challenging economy, it is the launch pad to the middle class. Our next speaker is not only the impressive leader of this great institution, he is a leader who is moving CUNY forward in so many important ways that are helping even more New Yorkers springboard to the middle class. This includes ambitious new initiatives to expand internships, boost career success for students, and increase support for adult learners. I could go on, but please give me give us more than just one person. Thank you. So Phalo, we're going to have this housing conversation today. We said, let's get the biggest housing expert in New York City, right? No, it's kind of strange to have a conversation with you about housing.
Well, it is, but first, thank you for the invitation and thank you for putting together this wonderful forum. But it is, one of the main reasons why, there's 2 things, right? I don't think that I need to tell anybody here that it doesn't require much to think that if you're housing insecure, if you're moving in between places, if you're in a shelter, if you're dealing with the fear of eviction, if you're navigating all that stuff, you can really concentrate on studying, on thinking about, what career you might want to take, perform well if you're part of a paid internship. Clearly, right? And it is one of the main reasons why students either stop or totally leave higher ed. It's not academic chops, is things like housing and food insecurity. And it's important, and this is why want to take advantage of the invitation, because I think from a policy take, people hear food insecurity and they say, I get that. And housing, because we have this preconceived notion of what college students are, which is wrong, right? we don't think a housing would be, right? Because the students are in dorms, right? Well, most college students are not in dorms nationally, right? That's just a picture that we have of a certain set of schools, right? I mean, about 80% of all the students nationally are not dorming, right? And in the case of CUNY, right, is about 3,000 students out of 250,000, right? So whatever the city and the state and we all get to do in tackling the affordability housing crisis, which is the topic here, is going to have a dramatic impact in the success of our students. So thank you.
Well, thank you for laying that out so well. And I guess I want to kind of bring it back to Cuff's core work around economic mobility. So if this institution, if CUNY, if your campuses are such that elevator for economic mobility, but you're saying that it isn't just tuition costs, it isn't academic reasons, but it's these other factors, including housing, that are getting in the way of that economic mobility. But tell us a little bit more, like how prevalent is this? I mean, like how many students, are we talking about a few dozen students that are facing housing instability?
So again, I mean, you've probably been working with the different presentations, and if you take a rubric like housing insecurity, and that's defined in different ways, right? And we got experts here, so I don't want to go too much in the weeds. But, we have some estimates in some of the work that we've done that, between 40 and maybe 30% of the students document having housing insecurity of some kind during the academic year, right? And that is a significant number of students. When you go into homelessness, the more traditionally defined, that is a smaller number, but it's still, 3, 5, 6%. And when you think about CUNY, that is a large number of students. If you put a different take, right, and we've been trying to think from a policy perspective on this arena, a report, and it might have been a report that you guys did, that documented that about 154,000 students in the New York City public schools face housing insecurity, right? That's where 80% of my students come, right? So a large bucket of those students, if we get to them and support them, are going to come to CUNY. So we're actually trying to think about how do we, if the Department of Education can already identify those students, right? And they decent likelihood of becoming CUNY students, can we begin to work with them earlier and identify that to be able to eliminate that barrier? But it is, it is a significant number. And for us, this is one arena where we really depend on the partnering with nonprofits in working on the policy arena, because we don't have dorms, right? So some of the things that you might read about good practices in some other places, in schools that do have dorms, is not really something that is part of our arsenal of options. So we really depend on partnering and good policy to address this.
Yeah, and you mentioned how prevalent housing instability is among your students, and I just want to kind of try to connect, and maybe you can help me, that we write about CUNY not just because obviously it's this great economic mobility generator for the city, but what we try to do is say, hey, students that enroll but don't complete, they're not getting the full economic benefits of this amazing. And there's so much research about how people that graduate from CUNY have these economic mobility benefits. But if you kind of drop out, and I guess I wanted to just ask you to kind of connect the dots and in just a couple of seconds about, like, this isn't just housing instability, isn't just this kind of problem for so many students, 30, 40%, but that it is a factor in persistence.
Oh, absolutely. As I said, I think people have the idea that the students who do not complete tend to do it because the classes were too hard, they were not academically prepared, right? And there's a sliver of that. The majority is all these other factors that are the ones that sort of keep them from, and it might be that you're dealing with, we stick to the housing situation, that you're dealing with, let's say, an eviction procedure, you're dealing with housing court, and you decide that you're going to take a semester off to navigate that, right? You do that, you got out, and then it's really, really difficult to bring you back, right? I mean, there's some of the programs and some of the things that some of the policies that's come out of our recommendations from the center, like Reconnect, that has allowed us to, sort of bring back a large number of students, and the governor is putting some additional resources into that. But then again, if you were better initially, you wouldn't need to be doing that reaching out in which you lose people. But it derails people, and any derailment there just makes it harder for you to come back, right? And candidly, even if you do stay, right? It affects your GPA, which has an impact on then, applying for jobs or thinking about professional schools. So it has a multiplying effect. So, actually, I'm dying to sort of get the notes from the conference in terms of things that we can be helpful in advocacy for more affordability on the housing front.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, when it comes to, let's say, food insecurity, you could put a food pantry, which I know you do. When it comes to childcare, you could have childcare assistance at some of your campuses. But when it comes to housing instability, what's CUNY's role in trying to help those students with these issues?
Well, so, I think joining the forces of advocacy in the city that are talking about large responses to the crisis, right? Because if that gets substantially improved, it's going to have an impact on my students, right? So that's bucket one. There are things in which we're exploring. We just we started a model with our 3 Bronx CUNY schools, CUNY Cares, with Bronx Community, Ostos, and Lehman, addressing basic needs, mostly food and housing insecurity, helping students make sure that to qualify for SNAP, you get it, you don't lose it. And we had a small group do some recommendations on the housing front. One that came and we're exploring to do is our law school has a clinic that supports actually some CUNY students, but it's open to individuals who are dealing with issues in housing court, right? If we had more resources, that clinic could get expanded, and you could see about, maybe setting a mini version of the clinic just with some of the CUNY campuses to assist the students who are dealing with some of these issues. We build additional capacity by having more opportunities for lawyers in training who are interested in this field, right, to do that, and we benefit the students, so we're talking to the law school to explore that possibility. I also understand that there's some, and again, I'm not a housing expert, so there's, the ones in the audience, please be kind, that there are some regulations that mention that students cannot participate in programs, and it's not always technically correct, right? So a lot of students self-select because of that information, that we could be helpful in clarifying that. I always thought that as you establish priority for, housing assistance, I know it's a delicate policy issue, but prioritizing students, could be another thing that could be done. So we're trying to kick all those things, and again, and you have written about this too, open to exploring with nonprofits. We've had some phenomenal work with the Coalition for Neighborhood Shelter in a program. Did I get that name right? And funding from Robin Hood, Petrie, and Trinity to do some work on these areas. So we're looking forward to even more of those partnerships, even maybe leverage some of the space that we have to be able to do some things. So those are some of the things that we're exploring.
That's great. I guess a 2-part follow-up one. With CUNY Cares, what's your, are there learnings, are there next steps to kind of take it to another level? You talked about a pilot in the Bronx. Are you looking to expand
it is a pilot, and we're just getting some of the results to be able to see. And the preliminary data is that it has, supporting a network, and I think it was Eli who was mentioning one of the examples before, the navigators in an example that he was using. Student navigators that work with the students has proven that it helps with their retention and graduation. They had a small group looking at housing, which they just briefed me on some of the recommendations last week, right? So we're digesting some of those things. But in some cases, is also amplifying things that we already have had in the schools. We've normally had, and when I was at Ostos, when I was president, we had folks in the student affairs team that were working with students that were dealing with housing court, that were dealing with emergency, mini grants. At times, make a huge difference to be able to pay rent for a month while something gets stabilized and do that. So the governor put, I think, some money into that in the budget currently. So we want to continue to expand those things, but ultimately, the city and the state addressing the issue writ large is going to be the biggest benefit for us, and we want to be helpful in any way to that.
That's great. CUF has written a lot about the non-tuition financial barriers facing CUNY students, because they are huge, and it's not just housing. Our next speaker, who we're going to be talking with in just a few minutes, City Council Speaker Julie Menin, and her colleagues in the City Council have done some really important things around expanding and providing Metro cards, free Metro cards or Omni cards now to some CUNY students. I'm curious, and that helps at the transit costs that CUNY students really face. But when it comes to some of these... Go ahead.
But the other thing is, I just want to say how important that is, because, again, the assumption is this is for the students to come and go to school. Really important. The other part of the transportation is if they're participating in an internship, if they're doing some of the other things that we want them to do to be ready for the economy, the Omni card becomes really, really important. Sorry for the for the interruption.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I guess I'm curious, when it comes to the housing insecurity issues or whatever, are there ideas or recommendations you have for policymakers?
Well, I mean, every time I talk to someone, I get a different take as to how viable that is. But I do think, I mean, in providing housing assistance, I know that in different programs, different categories of individuals have been prioritized, right? I would make a case that students, college students, could easily be one. If you think about it differently too, it should be, in the best of cases, actually something that has a high payoff, right? Because you're stabilizing someone who is getting all the credentials and all the learning that he or she is going to need to be able to improve their financial situation, and hopefully then not be in a situation where they are housing insecure, right? So not only are you building the social capital that we want for the city, but you're also then taking some people out of that need of assistance that then can be passed to some of the others. So I would imagine that if anybody crunched the numbers, that would be a good investment. I hear people have said that it's not easy to prioritize them, that there's some federal laws that prevent that. I'm not an expert, right? But if it is possible, I recommend that we do. And if there's some barriers, then go change the laws that make those barriers be there.
Well, obviously there's a lot of talk about how do you find new places, new lots or areas in New York City to build affordable housing. And CUF has written about some of the surface parking lots, 80 acres or so, as Eli mentioned earlier, at CUNY, on CUNY campuses. And we've kind of said, hey, if we develop some housing on the kind of far reaches of some of these spots, maybe some of the revenues from that could go into supporting economic mobility programs at CUNY. Maybe they could also go into housing CUNY students.
So let me do the large picture answer, and then respond to you as the president of a campus that dependent on parking, right? And people underestimate the importance of parking in those spaces. But let me take the large picture. Is we are exploring how we can leverage our footprint in terms of innovative ideas to be able to be part of how the city and the state responds to this crisis, right? So that's the large answer. We look at some things, and we are open to exploring, and we might be doing some more intentional things in the future in that space. So it's a large yes to your overall answer. When you start dealing with individual areas, it gets more complicated, as you would expect, right? I don't own those spaces. It's DASNY, right? So people assume that, CUNY can just, so there's all this other, most of those things are bonded, and those bonds have restrictions. So that in some places you may or may not be able to enter into a partnership that would lead to using fringe parking spots for to build, right? So we are looking. So it has to be a much more nuanced analysis to do that. But we are looking at that entire inventory because we think that we owe it to our students, we owe it to the city and the state to be part of how we're able to attack this problem head on. But the and you and I joked about this when the report came out. I was the president of Queens College before, and some of our campuses that are not as well served by public transportation are the ones that end up having some of those parkings, right? And when you remove parking for any reason, right, it became one of the big, campus issues because people unfortunately need the car to get there. But we are looking at that and not just parking, other spaces, air rights, some of the other things that we could do to partner and because we think that that's part of the solution but the politics of parking is
don't we know it, because when we put out this idea, we had the borough president of Staten Island hold a press conference to denounce us. So
I didn't want to go there, right? I think that I'm allowed.
We hear you.
I'm allowed in the island only under the pledge that I will not touch the parking spaces at CSI. But I mean, honestly, we're exploring all that, right? Because clearly. The same, I mean, there's bond issues, there's ways to sort of, clean that up and do that. The other thing that's tricky, right, and I just want to put that out there, is that the modeling for us to be able to get some revenue back is not as enticing, because the more that you deal with any kind of housing that is going towards affordability, the way that the mechanics of that financing works, it is not the most remunerative component. So if we were to do that, it might yield that, but I think it'd be more just doing it as part of a larger policy, being part of the solution more than a financing, just based on some of the things that we have explored.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll have you back to talk about education policy, hopefully sometime soon.
I'm happy.
Thanks for entertaining us on this. And can we all kind of a big round of applause for the CUNY Chancellor?
And thank you for your great work.
Thank you. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
So I'm now delighted to bring on our final speaker of the day, literally the Speaker of the City Council, Julie Menin. Speaker Menin is here in part because she has made housing affordability one of her biggest priorities. Thank you, Speaker Menin, for joining us.
Thank you.
She has really taken innovative steps, and we're going to hear a little bit about this, to help ensure that New York not only builds the affordable housing that is so needed today, but also expands programs to keep New Yorkers in their homes. But I also want to add, at this Economic Mobility Summit, that it's worth noting and celebrating that she has already left an important mark on economic opportunity in our city, thanks to her successful efforts to, among many other things, fund really major expansions to New York City Kids Rise, to the city's Fair Fare program, and to the city's FEPS rental assistance program. So again, another round of applause, please, for our City Council Speaker. So, first of all, you had a pretty busy morning, I hear.
Yes, Jonathan, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with all of you. And I'm sorry, I was scheduled to be here this morning, and I had to move the time because right now, as we speak, and starting early this morning, we had a seminal hearing on the horse carriage industry. I indicated my position yesterday that I believe it is time that we transition away from this industry. This is the first time in 40 years that the City Council is finally going to take on this issue. And of course, the solution also involves creating a pathway for the workers who've given their life to this industry. And so I've been very focused on really working on a path to guarantee jobs to those workers and keep them in the hospitality and tourism industry, but transition away from the horse-drawn carriages in the park. So we have a very intense hearing happening right now that I just stepped away from to be here, but it's an honor to be here with all of you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. We know how busy and how many important things you're doing. You know, we're here having you here in part because you've made housing probably a bigger part of your agenda than I think maybe any other speaker. And we have a former speaker as our board chair. Could you walk us through a couple of the key elements of that housing agenda and why you've made it such an important priority?
Thank you for the question, Jonathan. So I started my career in public service as a lawyer and small business owner. My business was decimated on 9/11. It was located a couple blocks from Ground Zero. I mention that because subsequent to that, I served as the 7-year chair of Community Board 1 in Lower Manhattan. And in those 7 years that I chaired Community Board 1, where we had 90 active construction projects happening in and around Lower Manhattan, I really got a firsthand look at our ULURP process and have a lot of thoughts on why I think it's broken and in sore need of reform. But it always struck me back then that the city council is largely a reactive body on land use, meaning a ULURP is presented to us, we react and weigh in on it. But this council has not been sort of as proactive around housing as I think we could be. And so I really was determined to change that. So what we have done is we're taking an outside of the box proactive look at how can we build more affordable housing in the city. And so 2 big ideas that we came out with are, first and foremost, we surveyed the 215 public library branches located in New York City to see which ones could we build affordable housing on. And so we've identified numerous sites, and we are now doing just that, where these projects will be 100% affordable in terms of the housing that is built on top of them. And it's a win-win because oftentimes for the libraries, they're in need of capital repairs. And every 4 or 5 years, you know, we'll approve some capital money to repair the libraries, and then they need more money. And this creates a brand new state-of-the-art public library, and on top of it, 100% affordable housing. So that's the first thing that we're doing. The second thing that we announced about a month ago is, and all of us I know have walked by them. You walk down a street and between 2 buildings, there'll be a vacant piece of land that is rather narrow in shape and usually overgrown with weeds and sometimes, unfortunately, rats. And you say, like, what is that? It's a small lot and it's not developable because the financials don't work. So we took out to survey them, and we came up with 2,850 of the small lots where we actually can develop. There are about 18,000 small lots in total in the city. We took 2,850 and said these are viable to develop on. What we need to do is we need to amend the construction code so that we take them from the 6 stories that they are zoned for now to 8 stories, and we change the fire case. There's a lot that we need to do around that because that are sort of sensible adjustments that we can make where we can allow 8 stories to be built. And so that's exactly what we're doing. And those 2,850 lots can be developed into 35,000 units of housing. So we're really excited about these 2 ideas, and it positions the council as someone who's really working to help to address the affordable housing crisis.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like, I want to say on the libraries idea, especially something, you know, we've written at CUF a whole lot about libraries. They are another very important economic mobility institution. And I just want to give you a big thanks and applause for that project. And this is something that the council hasn't kind of traditionally done, that kind of level of kind of pushing this forward. And besides just identifying the sites, you've kind of put some money or proposed putting money behind this as well.
Exactly. So we got money in the budget vis-a-vis HPD to allocate for these library projects. So we're very excited about that. And then you also mentioned 2 other things that we, or really 3 things that we very much focused on in the budget. One is NYC Kids Rise, which is a program I started a decade ago when I served as commissioner of the Department of Consumer Affairs. We launched a project with the Gray Foundation where we seated 10,000 kids in Queens School District 30 with a college savings account. These are public school kindergartners. And the premise was that a low-income child who has a college savings account is 3 times more likely to go to college than someone who does not, 4 times more likely to graduate, and earn almost double the wages in the course of their lifetime than someone who does not go into ongoing education. So I started that program a decade ago and was a founding board chair of NYC Kids Rise. We now have done 380,000 of those college savings accounts. So we're in our 8th grade cohort. What we did in the budget is I really wanted to increase the amount we were giving, because originally we gave $100 per child and invested it in the state's $529, so it would compound over time. Now we have taken it to, thanks to what we're doing in the budget, $1,000 for every public school kindergartner in New York City. So this is the largest college savings program in the country. It is going to be completely transformative because these young people can use the money for vocational school, for a 2-year community college, for a 4-year college. And again, the studies show that those students will earn almost double the wages in the course of their lifetime. It is, in my humble opinion, one of the single best ways we can actually tackle income inequality in our city. The other program you mentioned, of course, is Fair Fares. And I heard the comments you made with the Chancellor, because we're doing this expansion for CUNY students as well, pilot program. But Fair Fares, we're doing an expansion, adding an additional 340,000 New Yorkers will now be eligible for Fair Fare, taking it to 1.3 million New Yorkers who will be able to avail themselves of this reduced subway, bus, or paratransit. So we're really excited about that. And then lastly, on City FEPS, where we did an expansion of City FEPS and then got the mayor to agree to drop the lawsuit against the council, which is something I pushed very hard for, and we reached a settlement with the administration that involved a new city council bill that takes takes City FEPS from a program of entitlement to one that is subject to appropriations, and made some changes on the program as well.
Well, congratulations on all of that. And I think especially the Kids Rise is not just an affordability kind of step. It really, I think, is about economic mobility and economic opportunity, because we know how important college is, and saving for college, how hard that is in this city. So the $1,000 per child is really massive, and I think you got to make sure everybody understands how big that is. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to bring it back to housing, and we talked about, and you talked about, some of the kind of really big steps that you've taken and innovative moves that the council is taking around housing. I want to ask you a little bit about the kind of purpose or the framing of our conference today, which is like, we're trying to go beyond that we need to build more housing, or that we need to do more to keep people in their homes, to can we leverage housing policy for economic mobility, for ownership, for asset building, for wealth creation? I'm curious, to what extent are you and your colleagues in the council thinking about this? Are there initiatives you're proposing when it comes to expanding ownership? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we allocated $5 million in the budget for a new home ownership, particularly focused on Black communities around the city of New York, because we know home ownership is so important. It also, the initiative goes to issues around deed theft, because we know deed theft is just an enormous problem that we have to tackle. And so that funding that we allocated to home ownership is going to be very important. We're also going to be introducing very soon, so stay tuned, a whole suite of legislative proposals to protect home ownership, particularly in the Black community, where this has been a historic issue of concern. So I'm very excited about these bills that we'll be introducing very shortly. Also, I think our approach on the budget, when the mayor issued his preliminary budget back in January, it did include the threat of a property tax of 9.5%. That was non-starter for me, non-negotiable. City Council is the last stop on property taxes, and I took that issue off the table on the day that was, even mentioned, because raising property taxes 9.5% would decimate home ownership, particularly in Black and brown communities across the city.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you for that. I guess, just in closing, this is again the center's 3rd annual Economic Mobility Summit. And you've taken these steps around Kids Rise, the Fair Fares program. Are there other things that are percolating in your mind and on your staff or in the council that you think, what else can we be doing as a city, whether it's connecting housing and economic mobility, or just on economic mobility? Are there proposals or ideas that you'd like to see work forward in the next year?
Yes. So on economic mobility, we have to make sure that we're retaining and creating jobs. The single best way that we can make sure that we're really creating economic opportunity for New Yorkers, and particularly for the next generation, for younger New Yorkers who, are going to make this great city their home. we have to keep businesses here. We have to attract new businesses. I'm very concerned about some of the job numbers. I'm concerned that there are more financial sector jobs in the state of Texas and New York. That was never the case. We always outpaced, usually 3 to 1, not that long ago. And so that's a challenge. That is something that we as policymakers, as elected officials, absolutely need to lean into, because we cannot afford to have those businesses continue to leave and those jobs leave our city. Over 5,000 small businesses closed last year. That's unacceptable. So if you really want to, and I'm a former small business owner, so what are we doing about it? Actually, tomorrow we're passing this Cut the Red Tape Act, which is sponsored by my colleague, Councilmember Zhuang, which basically requires the city to reduce the time it takes to actually open a new business. Because we have all these businesses, some of whom are waiting years to open because they cannot get the necessary licenses and permits. That is ridiculous. And so we are going to be changing that through that legislation. I'm also introducing my own bill on Thursday that directs a commission to be appointed every 4 years that cuts down on regulations, cuts down on red tape, cuts down on fines. So when I served as Commissioner of the Department of Consumer Affairs back in 2014, we did a whole set of reforms to reduce fines on small businesses and to give small businesses 30 days to cure the violation, as long as it wasn't a major safety violation, before they would ever get assessed a fine. So those, to me, on economic mobility, we want to encourage entrepreneurship in our city. We want to encourage small businesses to grow and thrive here. So that is some of the work that we're going to be focused on in the months ahead.
That's great. Well, I can't agree more that it's difficult to have economic mobility without good jobs. So we need to make sure that's happened. And obviously the role of small businesses, you weren't here to hear it, but one of the 5 ideas that we published in our kind of economic mobility report today is about harnessing CUNY students, or putting CUNY students to work to help small businesses get up to speed when it comes to AI and other technologies.
Yes.
A lot of these younger CUNY students could really benefit from the work experience working with small businesses. But small businesses often have that kind of tech savviness gap.
Yes.
And so that's just one of our many ideas. But anyway, this has been an amazing conversation. We really appreciate you being here. And could everybody join me in giving a warm round of applause?
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan.
Well, thanks for all the great work you're doing, and we so appreciate having Speaker Menin, and thank you all for being here today. I want to also thank Brandee, McHale, Zebby, the entire team at Citi and Citi Foundation for their partnership and their support today. Thank you all for all you're doing in communities across the city, and a big thanks to the Center for an Urban Future staff. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.